The night was meant to be flawless. Golden chandeliers cast warm light around the enormous ballroom, and the air was thick with the fragrance of costly champagne and gourmet hors d'oeuvres. A live band played soothing jazz in the background, setting the tone for what should have been a celebration of love, loyalty, and a fulfilling life together. I had not spared any expense. 25 years of marriage deserved nothing less. Madison, my wife? No. The woman I thought was my wife had always had an expensive taste. She stood in the midst of the room in a glittering silver gown, mingling with the guests and laughing effortlessly. Her hand held a crystal flute full of champagne. Her lips curled into the ideal smile she'd always employed to achieve her goals. I took a sip of my own drink while watching her, experiencing the comfort that comes from knowing you've established something true and immovable. And suddenly, in the space of 5 seconds, my entire universe crumbled. Had been flowing through the crowd, shaking hands and smiling. Caught up in the evening glory. I heard her voice. Can you believe he still thinks these are his children? The words struck me like a hammer in the chest. My breath caught as I stopped in mid-step. The room around me appeared to blur. The sounds of clinking glasses and sweet laughing faded into silence. I slowly moved my head toward the voice. Madison stood close to my best friend, Steve. I watched as her delicate fingertips traced down his arm. A touch too familiar for two people who were only supposed to be pals. She smiled at him, her eyes flashing with delight. I was completely unaware that I was suddenly standing only steps away. Steve chuckled, shaking his head. His normal easygoing smirk was pasted on his face. However, there was something deeper beneath it. A sensation of ownership. And with all the money he spent on their fancy schools and travels, he whispered, taking a sip from his drink. We could not have done it better ourselves. I felt my stomach turn. I forced myself to breathe, clutching my glass so firmly that I feared it would shatter in my palm. This could not be genuine. And then, just to make matters worse, my oldest daughter was my flesh and blood. Or so I thought. I leaned closer with a sneer. Yeah. Uncle Steve is a lot more entertaining than our deadbeat dad. That was it. The final piece of my soul broke like a fragile twig underfoot. I stood there staring at them, feeling like the punchline of a horrible joke. Not only has Madison played me, but so has everyone else. And the worst part? They did not even bother to hide it. Madison gently kissed Steve's cheek, muttering something that sparked another round of laughter amongst them. They've been teasing me for who knows how long. 25 years of marriage. A lifetime of loyalty. And it was all a lie. I could have made a scene right there. I could have flipped the table and smashed my glass. Screamed in her face. But no, I would not give them that satisfaction. I inhaled sharply, forcing my expression to become more calm. I turned to face the stage, marching forward with deliberate strides, feeling nothing except a deep, bone-chilling knowledge that this night would be unforgettable, but not for the reasons anyone imagined. I picked up the microphone and tapped it twice. The room fell absolutely silent. All eyes went to me, including Madison's. She tilted her head, puzzled. Michael. I stared at her, Steve, and my so-called children. Then I spoke, my voice echoing over the room like a thunderclap. The party is ended. Gasps echoed through the audience. Madison's smile wavered. What are you? Don't. I shut her off. My voice is as keen as a sword. Please do not honey me. She blinked and shifted awkwardly. Michael, you are terrifying me. Oh, you should be terrified. I said softly, strengthening my grip on the microphone. You really should be. I turned to Steve, who had the arrogance to appear perplexed. How long? I asked. He swallowed. What are you talking about, dude? I uttered a bitter chuckle. Do not disrespect my intelligence. How long have you been screwing my wife? The comments blasted into the crowd like cannonballs. Whispers and murmurs sprang out immediately. Faces turned to Madison and Steve, their eyes widening in disbelief. Madison's face had lost its color. Michael, please let's talk about this privately. I ignored her and reached into my pocket to bring out my phone. I tapped the screen, and a voice came over the speakers. Can you believe he still thinks these are his children? It was Madison's voice, as clear as day. A wave of startled hush swept across the floor. Madison's lips parted, but no words emerged. Steve's face became hard. His hand tightened around the glass. And my children, whom I had reared, loved, and sacrificed for, were locked in place. Their betrayal is on plain show. I breathed slowly, allowing the weight of the moment to settle in the room. Then I smiled. It was not a cheerful smile. It was the type of smile that made mature men anxious. I turned to Madison and said, pack your things. You and your children are no longer welcome in my home. Madison stumbled backwards. Mike, please. You are making a mistake. I laughed, a hollow, harsh sound that lacked warmth. Oh, I am just getting started with that. I turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom. Madison was still yelling my name behind me, but I didn't give up since it was tonight. Tonight was only the beginning. Tomorrow, the real fun would begin. I awoke the next morning feeling nothing. Not relieved, saddened, or even angry. Only a chilly, hollow nothingness. It seemed as if something inside of me had been forcibly removed. Last night's events repeated over and over in my head. Steve had an arrogant expression. Madison made a simple betrayal. My so-called daughters used sarcastic language. They'd never loved me. Not one of them. I've been nothing but a walking wallet and a convenient fool. They used to be able to drain completely dry. I was no fool. And I wasn't going to let them keep anything I owned. Before the sun even rose, I was already at my lawyer's office. Charles had been my attorney for several years. A bright, no-nonsense individual who prioritized caution over all else. When I stepped in, he raised his brow slightly but said nothing. Just motioned for me to sit. I assume this is urgent, he replied, hooking his fingers together. Divorce? One replied plainly, effective immediately. Charles's expression did not change. I noticed him open a drawer and take out a big folder. Given what I overheard at the party last night, I took the liberty of preparing the required documentation. I breathed sharply. Did you know? I suspected, he admitted. You do not pay me to be blind, Michael. This was why I kept him around. I flipped over the documents. Everything was airtight. Madison would receive nothing. There is no alimony. No assets. Not a single penny of my hard-earned money. Despite Madison's protests, the prenuptial agreement I had insisted on years earlier was going to pay out in ways she could not have predicted. What about the kids? I asked. Charles hesitated. Legally, they never belonged to you. DNA testing is not necessary for this inheritance. But if you want to leave no space for debate, do it. I replied instantly. I want him removed from everything. There is no inheritance. No trust funds. Not one penny. Consider it done, Charles remarked, casually drawing out another document. As for your financial holdings. I leaned back, stiffening my jaw. Pull everything. Freeze the accounts. Transfer the stock. I want everything gone before she even awakens. Charles nodded in approval. Savage. I like it. Madison's entire life had fallen apart by the time I left his office. By mid-morning, my phone had begun to vibrate nonstop. Madison has 7 missed calls. Madison has 12 missed calls. Madison is 21. I missed calls. And then the text began. Madison. Michael, what is happening on? Madison. Why are our accounts frozen? Madison, I cannot access anything. My credit cards were refused. Call me right now. Madison, where are you? Then Steve called. I let them all go to voicemail. Then I got a single message from my so-called daughter, Jessica. Dad. It was the one message that gave me pause. Almost. Then I remembered how she laughed at me last night. I removed it. I did not even bother returning home. Instead, I kept a safe distance as Madison arrived at the house later in the day. She was in complete meltdown mode. Her hair was tangled, and she was still wearing the dress from the night before. She tried using her key to open the front door. It did not work. She tried again, shaking the handle. Her breath comes out in panicky gasps. Then she began beating on the door. Michael, open this damn door immediately. I observed from my car while sipping coffee. Minutes later, a moving crew arrived, which I, of course, had hired. Excuse me, ma'am, the lead mover explained, opening a clipboard. This property has been transferred to a new owner. You must vacate immediately. Madison turned to him, her eyes wide with disbelief. What? This is my residence. The mover looked at the clipboard. I understand, ma'am. This house is owned by Michael Carter. Madison's face had lost its color. She twirled wildly, taking out her phone and phoning. Probably me. The phone rang once, twice. I declined the call. Then I texted. Me? You do not live there anymore, she screamed. It was beautiful. By the time Madison realized she had lost everything, I was already 30,000 feet in the air. My private airplane took off just as the mayhem was at its climax. Madison was suddenly broke, homeless, and totally alone. Steve. He was no better. Every company he had ever applied to was one that I owned. He'd be blacklisted before he could even begin to rebuild. And what about my kids? They were on their own. As the jet flew into the clouds, I leaned back in my seat and sipped a glass of whiskey. For the first time in years, I felt liberated. Madison had been lying to me for 25 years. I was now giving her a lifetime to repent it. And I was only getting started. The world had forgotten Michael Carter. But I never forgot about them. And now it was time for my return. 5 years and 1825 days. That was how long I'd waited. I planned and rebuilt myself. I wasn't the same man who had been ridiculed at the anniversary party. The pitiful spouse who had been naive to the betrayal, brewing within his own home. That man had died the night I went away. The man returns. Far colder, far richer, and eager to kill them. The weight of the metropolis was palpable as soon as I stepped off my private flight. Familiar but remote. Like a location I used to reside but no longer belonged to. I took my time, enjoying what was to come. I'd spent years observing from a distance, keeping a tight check on the folks who had formerly taken advantage of me. And they had suffered. Steve lost his job almost quickly following my departure. Not just in his firm. Every job he applied for strangely slipped through his fingers. Hiring managers unexpectedly altered their thoughts. Opportunities vanished before he could seize them. Madison, once the queen of high society, has become a pariah. The moment my side of the story was told, she was shunned. Doors that had previously greeted her with champagne and a phony smile slammed shut. The women she used to talk with at brunch would not even answer her calls. The affair children, my so-called children, they resented her severely. Their lives had deteriorated from opulence to destitution. They went from attending private schools and wearing fancy clothes to sharing a two-bedroom flat in the worst section of town. And I made certain of it. Now it was time to pay them a visit. I did not go to them immediately. No, that's too easy. Instead, I made sure they noticed me before they realized I was back. My eldest, Jessica, was the first person I encountered. The person who had laughed at me all those years before. She was working a dead-end retail job, folding inexpensive garments beneath the flickering fluorescent lights of a department store. I stood at the door, watching her. At first, she didn't notice me. Then her eyes froze. Her fingers became stiff around the sweater. Her breath hitched as she folded. I saw recognition dawn on her face, followed by complete panic. She blinked quickly, as if to reassure herself she wasn't seeing a ghost. I grinned a little. Then I turned to walk away. She vanished before she could call my name. Steve, the man who had once smirked at my expense, was now an empty shell when we met again. I discovered him at a rundown gas station, wiping sweat from his brow while he pumped gas for minimum wage. His once pristine hair was now graying, and his belly stretched the cloth of his shoddy outfit. He appeared weary, broken, and that's when I got out of my car. One of my new ones. Sleek, black, and is worth more than his entire life. I didn't say anything, I simply let him see me. His eyes expanded. His jaw fell. He stepped forward. Lips parted as if he were going to speak. But I had already gone. I saved Madison for last. She was right where I expected her to be. An inexpensive eatery on the outskirts of town. Working as a waitress. The woman who used to wear diamonds and fancy outfits now wore a dirty uniform. She was exhausted and slumped down while she took orders from nasty clients. I waited till her shift finished. Then, as she emerged from the back entrance, I was there, leaning against my luxury car. Madison came to a dead stop. Her purse slid from her fingers and landed on the pavement with a quiet thump. Her breath came out in quick spurts, and her hands shook. Michael. The first nodded slightly. Madison? She gulped hard. Her gaze darted around, as if she were looking for an escape. Why you? You're back. Have you missed me? I asked in a calm voice. Dangerous. Tears filled her eyes. This time, they're real. Not the phony ones she had previously used to trick me. Please, Michael. I was stupid. I was selfish. I lost everything. I held up a hand to silence her. You did not lose everything. I corrected her, and my tone was even. I took everything. Madison flinched. She knew what I had done to her. She just never imagined I'd return to make sure she stayed in the dirt where she belonged. I apologize, she muttered, her voice shaking. Thank you, Michael. I was a fool. A terrible wife. I should have valued you. I should have. You should have. I agreed. But you didn't. Tears streamed down her face. You have no clue how difficult it has been, and how much I have suffered. Thank you, Michael. I've got nothing left. I need you. I took a slow stride forward. Do you need me? I repeated, pretending astonishment. That's funny, because you didn't need me 5 years ago. Her sobs were urgent. I will do anything to make things up to you. Just, please give me another chance. I laughed. A frigid and vicious chuckle. You don't get a second opportunity, Madison. I spoke, my voice slashing through her like a knife. You, like me, will have to face the repercussions of your conduct. She sank to her knees and clutched my pant leg like a beggar. Please, I loved you. I was just. You were just what? I snapped and yanked my leg away. Bored. Greedy. Selfish. She sobbed uncontrollably. I squatted down and lifted her chin with 2 fingers, forcing her to look at me. Were you my wife? I muttered. And you destroyed me. A glimmer of hope appeared on her face. But then I stood up, stepped back, and dealt her the fatal blow. I'm blissfully engaged now. Madison's breath tightened. She is everything you were not, I continued, watching her face crumple. Loyal, loving. She truly respects me. Madison's whole body trembled. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. She had nothing left, and she knew it. I got in my car and rolled down the window one more time. Hello, Madison. Then, with the sound of the engine, I left her in the dust, broken, alone, and just where she deserved. And his wrath was complete. The first stroke in my game of retribution was buying Steve's house, which he had barely managed to keep after I had financially destroyed him. It was already in foreclosure, and with a single stroke of my pen, the property was mine. A week later, I served the eviction notice. I imaged their horror as they opened the letter, realizing that I still had influence over their lives. Even after so many years, Madison crawled in quickly, as expected. Around midday, my secretary buzzed my office. Sir, there's a woman here who insists on seeing you. She replied hesitantly. She claims it's urgent. I already knew who it was, Madison. I smirked and let her in. The door opened, and in walked the woman who used to wear diamonds and silk but now looked like she belonged on the street corner. Her once perfectly groomed hair was limp and greasy, and her hurriedly applied makeup couldn't conceal the dark circles and hollow cheekbones. She wore a cheap department store outfit that barely fit her, as if she had dropped a lot of weight due to stress. I nearly felt terrible for her when her eyes met mine. They welled up with tears. Michael, she said, her voice hoarse with desperation. I did not respond. I simply leaned back in my leather chair and watched her. She moved forward, wringing her hands. Please do not do this, she begged. Do what? I asked calmly. Take us home. She coughed out, new tears streaming down her cheeks. We have nowhere else to go. I acknowledged that I made a mistake. I understand I was a lousy wife, but please. I raised an eyebrow. You're just realizing it now. Her lips quivered. I was selfish. I was cruel. I allowed myself to assume that I could have it all and never face consequences. But I promise, Michael, the first once loved you. I gave forth a hollow laugh. Really? Do you love me before or after calling me a loser at our anniversary party? Madison's face distorted from pain. That was before or after you allowed me to raise another man's children for 25 years. I cut my voice sharply. She sank to her knees. Right in my office. I have nothing, Michael. She sobbed. No money, no friends, and no future. Please. You are my husband. You can only love me once, right? Can't you please show me some mercy? I walked around my desk, eventually hovering over her. She once looked down on me, believing I was weak and that she had triumphed. She was now beneath me, both physically and figuratively. Mercy. I repeated, tilting my head. Did you show me mercy by spending my money on another man? Did you offer me mercy by letting me believe those children were mine? Madison shook his shoulders furiously. I was stupid. I was greedy. I crouched down, raising her chin with 2 fingers. Madison, the first mumbled, you do not deserve mercy. Her breath caught. You deserve everything you have now. I continued. Nothing. She let out a choked sob as I rose up and buttoned my suit jacket. Now, please pardon me, I added, nodding toward the door. I had a meeting with my fiancé. Madison's whole body stiffened. Her red-rimmed eyes widened in amazement. Fiancé? She stammered. I smirked. Oh, did I say I have moved on? She's gorgeous, young, and, most crucially, I leaned down little. The voice was filled with amusement. Loyal. Madison appeared to have recently been stabbed in the chest. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her fingers grabbed at the carpet under her, as if looking for a solid foundation in a universe that had suddenly spun out of control. I turned around and walked back to my work. Security will lead you out, I replied plainly. Don't come here again. Madison's cries rang across the room as I punched the intercom button. Jenna, please have someone remove the trash. And with that, my ex-wife was booted out of my office like a useless liar, but I wasn't finished humiliating them. Not even close. The next day, I ensured that the eviction was widely publicized. Steve and Madison was violently removed from their home in front of the entire neighborhood. Movers took their inexpensive furniture and dumped it on the sidewalk like garbage. Madison yelled, attempting to fight them. Steve just stood there, immobilized with guilt. The neighbors whispered. Some were filming. A few people laughed. Didn't they used to be wealthy? A woman mumbled. She cheated on her husband. Another murmured. Can you believe it? Madison's humiliation was complete. As she collapsed on the pavement, witnessing her entire life shatter in front of her, She looked up and saw me. I was parked across the street, watching from the luxury of my fancy vehicle. Madison's bulging eyes hooked on mine. I smiled. Then I rolled up my window and drove away, leaving them in the dust. They'd laughed at me once. Now the whole world was laughing at them, and I was only getting started. Steve had always been the golden boy. Back then, he was the one with the confident grin, the effortless charisma, and the innate ability to get away with anything. He was the type of guy who could talk his way out of trouble and into anyone else's bed, even my wife's. But that was before I stripped him of everything. Before I wrecked his future, I made certain that every possible door for him had been closed. The way he chuckled behind my back, while taking my life. Now he was just a washed-up, bitter failure, and I was ready to witness him crumble even further. Steve had been looking for a job ever since I shut him off from all opportunities. I made certain he never made it past the first round of interviews. Every time he applied for a job, his resume mysteriously went missing. Every time he landed an interview, he realized he wasn't the right fit. And every time he believed he had a chance, I made sure to personally reject him one by one. I acquired or affected every company in his industry. If he applied to a firm, I would buy it. If he asked for a lower position, I denied it. If he tried to freelance, I destroyed his reputation. Steve quickly realized that no one would hire him. And the best part? He had no idea it was me. At least not initially. I saw him wiping tables in a shabby little bistro, wearing a cheap apron smeared with coffee spills. The once proud, arrogant man who had taken my wife and laughed at me was now cleaning up after youngsters for tips. I strode in with purpose, making sure the heels of my Italian leather shoes clicked against the tiled floor, catching attention. Steve's back was turned toward me. But he knew when the cafe became completely silent. He stood up slowly, clutching the damp rag in a shaky fist. Then he turned, and the second was bloodshot. Eyes landed on me. I saw it. Recognition. Humiliation. Pure, soul-crushing defeat. Long way down. His jaw tightened as he stepped closer, amused. His shoulders became tense, but he said nothing at first. He simply stared at me. His expression alternated between wrath and humiliation. "You did this to me." He eventually spat, his tone low and angry. I chuckled and shook my head. "No, Steve, you did it to yourself." I will let the words soak in. Allow him to feel the weight of them. The muscle in his jaw twitched, and his fists squeezed around the rag, turning white. "You've ruined my life," he hissed. "You." I raised my hand, cutting him off. "Oh, don't cry now. You didn't mind taking from me when it was handy." His nostrils flared. "I lost everything." I raised an eyebrow. "Welcome to the club." He exhaled sharply, his gaze darting around the cafe, aware that everyone in the room was listening and watching. He was accustomed to being admired, feared, and revered. He had become a joke, and I was here to add salt to the wound. "Do you recall when you used to laugh behind my back?" I asked, going closer and lowering my voice so only him could hear. "When you and Madison called me a loser while spending my money." His jaw twitched again. His breathing became unsteady. "I remember," I said, leaning slightly and spoke softly. "But, Steve, you are now the loser." I took a step back, watching as his face crumbled under my words. He glanced aside, his pride too frail to bear my gaze. The arrogant, condescending man who used to strut around as if he was superior to me was now nothing. And he knew it. I could have left right there, but where is the fun in that? I took out my wallet, drew out a crisp $100 bill, and casually tossed it on the table. "For your worries," I said calmly. Steve froze. His breath came out in a loud, ragged exhale, his fists tightening and shaking. For a second, I expected him to take a swing at me, but he didn't because he couldn't. Not without being fired. Not without embarrassing himself. Even more so. He simply stood there, absolutely powerless. I smirked. "Have a nice day, Steve." Then, without another word, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him precisely where he belonged. At the bottom, Madison had reached rock bottom. She was left with nothing after the eviction, social shame, and financial collapse. The previously sophisticated, high-maintenance woman who used to spend my money without hesitation was now begging for scraps. And just as she felt things couldn't get any worse, I made sure they did. I've been planning this moment for years. It was a huge occasion, a charity gala, one of the year's largest social events, attended by the wealthy and powerful. Madison used to get along with all kinds of people, but not anymore. She was not invited. She had no tickets, connections, or status. And yet, she was present. I noticed her the instant she entered the ballroom. She did not belong. She didn't wear fancy gowns anymore. Instead, she forced herself into an old cocktail dress that no longer fit properly. The fabric clung too tightly to her body, highlighting the weight she had lost. Her heels were scuffed, her jewelry was false, and her once perfect air of confidence was vanished. She was desperate. She had crept in, hoping to find someone, anybody, who would throw her a lifeline. And then she noticed me standing in the center of the ballroom, dressed in a fitted suit that most likely cost more than her whole financial account. And beside me, her replacement. Her name was Hannah. Unlike Madison, she wasn't a gold-digging parasite. She was a compassionate, educated, and fiercely loyal lady who had supported me while I rebuilt my life. She wasn't only there to fill the hole. She was the kind of lady I should have married from the beginning. Madison froze at the sight of us. I witnessed it in real time. The precise moment her heart burst. Her wide eyes shifted between my hand resting on Hannah's waist and the way we gazed at each other, perfectly in rhythm. She snapped. She stormed through the mob. Her heels clattered against the marble floor. Her breathing is irregular. She didn't mind if others were observing. She wasn't concerned about the scene she was going to create. All she saw was me and someone else. "Have you already moved on?" Madison hissed, stopping inches from me. Hannah flinched beside me, but I only lifted my brow, amused immediately. I echoed, taking a slow sip from my drink. "It has been 5 years, Madison. That is longer than your entire affair." Her expression swung between fury, regret, and something more. Something rough. I loved you," she burst out, her voice breaking. I laughed. A sincere and deep laugh. "Did you?" I inquired, tilting my head. "Or did you enjoy the fact that I was your personal ATM?" Her lips twitched. "It was not like that. It was just like that." I cut in smoothly. "You did not love me. You enjoy my money, my security and stability. And now?" I smirked and leaned in little. "You own neither." Madison's face wrinkled. She opened her mouth to argue. But what could she say? What excuse could possibly explain her actions? The folks around us were watching and whispering. Her embarrassment was on full show. She was nothing. Now, she was aware of it. Her gaze darted to Hannah. She's merely a substitute," Madison sneered, grasping for straws. "Do you think she will not betray you too?" Hannah gave a gentle, confident smile. Then she reached up and carefully adjusted my tie, like she had done 100 times before. Her touch was warm and comfortable. "Unlike you," she said simply. "I truly adore him." Madison obviously flinched. I turned to Hannah. My hand rests on the small of her back. "Ready to go?" She nodded, unconcerned with Madison's outburst, and then looked away from the lady who had devastated my history. We walked away. Madison stood there, watching as we vanished, knowing she had lost me forever. She had swapped gold for dust, and now she had to live with her decision. Madison had nowhere else to go. The world she used to navigate with ease, full of luxury, high-status acquaintances, and connections, had crumbled to dust. Her affair with Steve had been a lifeline. The one thing she clung to as the money and comfort I supplied dwindled. But Steve was equally broke as she was. He was getting by in a dead-end job, living in a tiny apartment with nothing else to give her. She had destroyed all of her bridges. Now she had nothing except pride and regret. But none of this matters today. She came to me. It was late in the evening when the knock came. At first, I assumed it was simply the wind, or perhaps one of the neighbors. But no. The knock remained harsh and relentless. I opened the door expecting to see one of my business partners. Madison, who stood there looking like a hollow shell of the woman I once loved, could have been an old friend. Her once perfect makeup was ruined by tears. Her hair, which is typically perfectly groomed, hung limp around her face. She was dressed in poor and ill-fitting clothes. The kind of clothes you'd wear when you're desperate and want to cling to anything you can find. She was a shadow of the lady who had previously stolen everything from me. "Please, Michael," she pleaded, her voice unsteady and hoarse. "I do not desire money. I only want you." I stared at her for a long time. 5 years of stillness. 5 years of repairing my life while she remained in the wreckage she created. And now, after all, she had this thought. The lies, the betrayal, the years of seeing me give my all to someone else's family. Now she wanted me back. I could feel wrath swelling in my chest. But I held it back. Instead, I gave a hard laugh. A chuckle born of anger, grief, and the understanding that this was the lady I used to love. "You're obviously insane," I said, my voice full of incredulity. She stepped forward. Her hands clenched together in despair. "Thank you, Michael. I'm sorry I damaged you, but I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." Her voice trembled. "I will do anything. Please don't shut me out." I shook my head slowly, remembering everything she had done to me. "Do you want me to forgive the woman who humiliated me and laughed at me while I was raising her?" Lovers, children. Madison's face twisted. The raw pain was obvious. But I wasn't going to be convinced. Not this time. She leaned out to touch me, but I stepped away. Thank you, Michael. She wailed, her tears flowing freely now. I made an error. I was selfish and harsh. I am aware of this. But I do adore you. Please do not turn me away. I can change. I will be the woman you deserve. I stood there still and frigid, watching the lady I once adored crumble before me. She was on her knees now. Her hands were clasped together in a desperate prayer, begging me for forgiveness she didn't deserve. I felt a twinge of something, a glimpse of the man I used to be. The man who would have welcomed her back with open arms. But he was long gone. The guy before had rebuilt himself from nothing, forging a new life in the crucible of her treachery. And that man was not going to let her back in. I moved closer. My gaze remained locked on her tear-streaked face. My voice was frigid, a blade wrapped in silk. No, Madison, I replied. Every word is purposeful and stinging. You made a decision, and you now have to live with it. Her cries became more intense, and her hands stretched for me, her fingers shaking with desperation. Thank you, Michael. She muttered, barely audible. I do not want to be alone. I can't continue like this. You were my world. I could feel her suffering. I could feel her regret in the air between us. But that wasn't enough. Not after all. Not after she had completely devastated me. How she devastated us. I took a step back and gave her one final glance. The woman I had loved. The woman who was once mine. Everything was broken and shattered, and I had no intention of gathering up the pieces. I grabbed for the door and carefully closed it in front of her. She was cut off. Please click. The sound resonated down the hallway. And just like that, she was gone. I didn't feel relieved. Not precisely. I sensed something much colder. Indifference. Madison had once been my entire universe. But now she was simply a chapter in a book I'd long since finished reading. I leaned against the door, taking deep breaths, trying to get rid of the sight of her, her frantic face, and her broken pleas. But I couldn't, because she still had control over me. But it was a tenuous hold, like a transient memory in the back of my mind. Madison's pain was her own, and I moved away from the door, tired of carrying her weight. I reflected on everything that had led up to this moment. The betrayal, anguish, and wrath. But most of all, I remembered Hannah, the lady who stood by my side after Madison abandoned me. Hannah was the future, not Madison. I was finished with her. Madison and Steve were in the gutters. They had fallen so far that it was difficult to recognize the formerly confident, arrogant couple who had almost destroyed my life without me. Without my wealth, contacts, and unknowingly made sacrifice for them. They were nothing. And now they were homeless, unemployed, and sad, living in a dilapidated shelter, scraping by on the barest scraps. I kept my eye on them. Of course. Why shouldn't I? Their downfall was a type of catharsis. A method to see the two people who had devastated my world face the repercussions of their crimes. People who had laughed at me while I gave them everything, are now throwing it back at me. They were nothing. And I was everything. I could not have guessed how far they would fall. Homeless shelters were a long cry from the opulent penthouses and high-end businesses they were used to visiting. Steve, who had once taken delight in his smug smirk, now walked with his shoulders stooped, his face unshaven, and his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. You tried getting employment here and there, but he was always turned down, either because of his ruined reputation or because he was just unqualified. I control the majority of the firms he applied to, and I made sure Steve's name was banned everywhere. Madison, on the other hand, had attempted to beg her way back into former social circles. But no one would accept her. Nobody would take a chance on the woman who had produced so much scandal and drama. She attempted to play the victim, guilting people into assisting her. But the shame she held was far too great for even her charm to conceal. People saw through her ruse, and one by one, she was shut out. Some days, I worried if she recognized how far she had gone. I'd like to think she did that. She was crushed under the weight of everything she had lost. But the reality was that she lacked the strength to confront it. Her days were filled with feverish attempts to appear current, but it was like watching a ghost chase a fading recollection of her previous existence. She was dying on the inside, and it didn't take long before she ran out of people to fake with. For Madison and Steve's lives sank downward into a pit of sorrow. My own life was blossoming in ways I never expected. I was not simply surviving, I was winning. Hannah had been all I needed in the aftermath of my collapse, but Madison had cheated me, abused my trust, and destroyed the entire core of our relationship. Hannah had put me back together brick by brick, making me complete again. We'd taken our time. Following Madison's destruction, I did not rush into anything. But Hannah had always been there for me, A loving hand when I needed consolation, and a fierce ally when I needed help rebuilding. Hannah had helped me rediscover joy, the type of delight that comes from being in the company of someone who actually values you for who you are, not what you can do. She did not want my money. She didn't require anything from me but my affection. I had a prosperous corporate empire that continued to expand under my direction. The investments I made, following Madison's treachery, were paying off in dividends. I've traveled the world. I attended gala events. I met international leaders, corporate moguls, and celebrities, all of whom treated me with kindness. I'd achieved success beyond my wildest dreams. Madison had served as my anchor, but Hannah was my wings. She allowed me to fly. And just when I thought I couldn't get any more satisfied, I heard the final echoes of their demise. Madison had been sighted outside one of the most prestigious events in town, the same gala she had crashed 5 years prior. She had come intending to mingle with the social elite and steal her way back into the environment she had previously flourished in. However, this time, no one took her in. She was turned away from the door. They had seen her for what she was, a desperate, damaged woman attempting to reclaim a life that had long been lost. They noticed the fissures in her armor and the desperation in her eyes. They saw the disgrace written all over her, and she had nowhere else to go. It was over. The following day, I received a call from her. She was crying, barely able to form meaningful sentences. Her voice was so cracked and unfamiliar that I almost didn't recognize it. "Mike, please, please. I need you. I apologize. I was mistaken. I am nothing without you, without your money, without the life you provided me." Her remarks were nothing more than a fragmented trickle of despair. She had fallen so low that she was willing to ask the woman who had once looked down on me, laughed in my face, and was now pleading for compassion on the other end of the phone. I could not contain the rush of satisfaction that was coursing through me. "I'm sorry, Madison, but I can't help you." I spoke, my voice chilly and deliberate. "You made your choice, and now you must live with it." She pleaded. "Michael, please do not leave me like this. Please. I will do anything. I will beg anyone. I will apologize. I will fix everything." But I was not listening. My mind's door had long since closed. Goodbye. Madison and I hung up the phone. That was it. The final blow. Madison's desperation was sad. She had been brought to her knees, yet I felt no sympathy for her. No part of me wanted to help the woman who had broken me. As I sat in my office, looking out at the city, I noticed something. Something I'd struggled for throughout the years. I had triumphed not because I was stronger, or because I had destroyed them, but because I had broken free. I'd let go of the past. I'd stopped allowing their betrayal to control me. And I was finally free to enjoy the life I deserved. Madison and Stephen. They were lost. But I was thriving. And there was nothing. No amount of begging or regret will ever change that. The ceremony was simple yet exquisite, in stark contrast to the lavish wedding I had previously enjoyed with Madison. But this time, the environment felt appropriate. This time, I was not simply marrying a woman. I was embracing the future that I deserved. Hannah stood alongside me, her hand gently resting in mine as we said our vows. She was my rock, my secure haven in a world that had attempted to devour me whole. Her eyes shone with a mixture of excitement and sincerity. As we made commitments to one another. "I promise to love you for all of my days." Hannah spoke gently, her voice firm and unwavering. "To never let you feel the anguish you've experienced. And to be your strength whenever you need it." I gazed at her, my heart filled with emotions I hadn't felt in a long time. "I promise to always stay by you and never let the past cloud our future. You are my bliss, Hannah. My tranquility." The officiant proclaimed husband and wife. And we kissed. I felt the weight of years of grief, betrayal, and regret slip off my shoulders. This was my fresh beginning. My new life began with more than just marriage. It represented everything that had come before it. I spent years reconstructing myself, reclaiming my strength, power, and identity. I had built a future for myself that was full of possibilities. I gave myself a second opportunity, and now I'd live it completely. Hannah and I moved into a new home. Our home. It wasn't like the mansion I shared with Madison. There is no expensive decor or pompous displays of riches. This location seemed honest and comfortable. Warm. It wasn't a house that showcased how much money I had. It was a mansion that embodied all I had strived for. I earned everything with my own hands. Hannah's warmth soothed the scars Madison had inflicted on me. She understood me like no one else could. With Hannah, I didn't have to pretend I didn't need to wear a mask. She loved me for who I was. Not for my success or fortune, but for the guy I had become in the aftermath of the carnage. We traveled together, discovering new countries and customs. Every moment felt like a celebration, a prize for the hell I'd been through. However, It was not simply about the material possessions or the experiences. It was a sense of finally being at peace. I'd finally let myself to recover. And then there was Madison. What has she become? She was only a footnote in my story. A warning to anyone who might try to repeat her mistakes. I had heard about her, and how she attempted to restore her connections with others following the fallout. She attempted to reconstruct her life, but it was not the same. Nobody trusted her. Nobody wanted anything to do with the lady who had ruined everything in her path. People who had formerly called her a friend now spoke of her in hushed tones. Her name left a smear on their lips. It was like seeing a slow-motion vehicle wreck. You knew what was going to happen, yet you couldn't look away. She had nothing now. No money, no friends, and no respect. Most tragically, no one left who genuinely cared for her. I heard she spent the majority of her time in the same squalid apartment she was forced into, after I took everything away from her. She sought refuge in inexpensive distractions, hoping to restore some sense of control over her life. But she couldn't. She wouldn't get it back. Not after all she'd done. She was no longer a memory. She was a cautionary story. A woman who had taken everything for granted, and then lost it all. Her pride, arrogance, and greed. Nothing mattered when the foundation on which she had constructed her life fell. I didn't detest her anymore. I did not need to. I felt nothing for her anymore. But I was not going to aid her. She made her choice. She had faced the consequences. Finally, she had to face the vacuum she had created in her own life. And then there was Steve, my former best friend. The man who was my full-blooded sibling. I had smiled as he destroyed my life. And now I watched him suffering for it in ways I could not have predicted. Steve had fallen much farther than Madison after his public humiliation, and the crushing weight of his betrayal. He had attempted, like Madison, to scrape by and have some sort of a life. However, the world was no longer kind to him. He had been blacklisted in all industries. His name is a symbol of failure. The businesses I owned did not want him. The folks I knew did not want him. He was nothing but a damaged guy who had destroyed every bridge he had ever crossed. I had heard that Steve was living in a shabby part of town and working a low-wage job to make ends meet. He had no dignity left, no friends, and no allies. I believe he realized, like Madison, that he had lost everything. The difference between us was this. Steve had nothing more to rebuild. No second chances. No future. He was a man left to rot in the aftermath of his own decisions. As I stood by Hannah in our life together, I understood how far I'd come. I reclaimed everything that was properly mine and rebuilt my life from the ground up. I had stopped allowing my past to define me. And now I was the man I had aspired to be. I wasn't simply a survivor. I was the victor. I had won because I had decided to go forward. I had decided to put behind the past that had attempted to destroy me and embrace a future that was entirely mine to design. I was not burdened by regret or bitterness. I had forgiven myself long ago. I had everything I wanted. Not because I was wealthy, although I was, but because I possessed something far more valuable. Tranquility. As I stood there with Hannah, staring out at the life ahead of us, I realized this was only the beginning. The past would remain a part of me, but it would never control me again. The future was mine, and I was ready for it. In Madison, Steve, they may continue their suffering. Despite everything, I had flourished. I found my redemption. And nothing could take that away. The air was crisp outside. The kind of cold that made the world seem new. It's like a fresh start. The environment around me was quiet and pleasant, just how it should be. I stood at the window of my new mansion, my hand resting pleasantly on Hannah's. The life I had created with her was nothing short of magnificent. Every aspect, from the polished marble flooring to the beautifully curated art pieces on the walls, reflected my rising from the ashes. Hannah stood near me. Her presence is both comforting and exciting. A stark contrast to the chaos that once characterized my life. Her gentle voice broke the silence as she softly squeezed my hand. "This is everything we've worked for, Michael," she replied, her eyes glowing with pride. "We genuinely created something amazing." I nodded and glanced at her. The woman who had remained by my side throughout everything. She'd seen me at my lowest. And now she was standing with me at my highest. "You're correct," I said, my voice firm and steadfast. "But the true beauty is not in the house or the possessions we've accumulated. It's in the tranquility we've discovered. The peace I had to battle for." I gazed out the window again, my gaze narrowing as I noticed the figures in the distance. They were difficult to distinguish at first, but the distinct shapes of Madison and Steve eventually became evident. They sat on a bench near the park, side by side. Their heads hung down. There was no more laughing or life between them. They resembled two persons who had been entirely hollowed out by their own decisions. I couldn't help smirking. Justice was served. Look at them. I whispered, barely able to contain the happiness that flooded inside me. Look at what they've become. Hannah followed my eyes. Her brow furrowed as she observed the couple. They appear to be broken. Are they? I responded simply, my tone frigid. They should be. They deserve nothing but this. I couldn't look away from them. There they were, Madison, the lady who had been everything to me for a quarter of a century, and Steve, my greatest friend and the man I trusted the most. Both were people's shadows. They utilized to reflect the decisions they had made. Lies, betrayal, and affair. It had all led up to this point of disaster. They assumed I was gone. I thought I was out of their lives forever. But they were mistaken. I wasn't simply gone. I had transformed into something they could never touch again. They thought they could destroy me, but I annihilated their world. Madison had attempted to beg for forgiveness. I could still hear her desperate pleas. Her voice cracked under the weight of regret. Unfortunately, it was too late. Too much time had elapsed. She'd gone too far. She'd made her bed. Now she had to lie in it. It had began with tiny things. An email to Steve. A subtle indication that I knew what was going on and was on to them. But when I took the rug out from under them, when I stripped them of the life they had so luxuriously taken for granted, Madison realized the true implications. She'd cried. She implored. But I felt no sympathy for her. None. Steve had attempted to cling to the last vestiges of his pride. But the truth was that he was a damaged man, absolutely powerless in the face of the harm he had caused to his own life. Madison once asked me, "Do you ever think about what we had? After I'd stolen everything." Her voice had sounded weak, as if she was clinging to the last shred of faith that I might still care. The family we created. I'd looked at her, the woman I once loved. The woman who had ripped my heart apart and told me no. I'm thinking about what you did to me, Madison. I reflect on the lies, the betrayal, and the children I raised as my own. All for nothing. I think about it. And I think about how you and Steve will suffer for the rest of your lives, since what you done is permanent. Her face had slumped, but I was not going to let her off that easily. Not anymore. And now, as I watched them from my window, I felt a strange sensation of contentment. They were paying for their sins. No more pretending, no more luxury, and no more falsehoods. Their world had collapsed, and they couldn't put it back together. But it wasn't simply the money, wealth, and worldly possessions I had taken from them. They had lost respect, and it was something they would never regain. Madison had spent years beguiling social circles as the perfect wife and mother. But now she was considered a pariah. Every attempt she made to infiltrate influential circles, or even casual meetings, failed. People had started talking. The truth always emerges, regardless of how much you try to conceal it. And Steve, the man who had formerly strolled with the confidence of someone who thought he could get away with everything. He was now a shadow, working menial tasks to live. His pride is long gone, shattered under the weight of his previous actions. And I hadn't just survived, I had thrived. I had reclaimed what was mine and more. Hannah's hand clenched around mine as she caught my gaze. "Michael," she spoke quietly, "don't let them occupy your thoughts anymore. You have already won." I turned to her, my lips curled into a little smile. She was correct. I had won. I didn't need to continue gazing back. I didn't need to keep focusing on their pain. Only a small part of me, the part that still felt the pain of betrayal, couldn't help but watch them fall. "Anna seems to comprehend. She always did. But I do know you," she proceeded. "This victory is yours. But it is also ours. You and I. We built our life together. They don't matter anymore." Her words were a balm for my soul, soothing the wrath that was still simmering beneath the surface. Hannah had been there when I needed her the most. She never condemned me for my past, my rage, or the darkness that overtook me. And united, we stood on top of the globe. As I stood there, my hand intertwined with Hannah's, I finally allowed myself to feel peaceful. They had become nothing. They were ghosts from my past. I had left the past behind. I leaned down and gently kissed Hannah, my lips lingering against hers. When I pulled away, I muttered, "This is only the beginning, baby. Everything I've gone through has led me here. To us." Her grin was brilliant, and her eyes reflected the depth of her comprehension. And as we stood there, staring at the shattered ruins of a life I once knew, I couldn't help but believe that the finest revenge was not in the destruction of others, but in the life I had constructed. I had won, and nothing could take it away from me. As the sun fell below the horizon, I turned away from the window, Hannah by my side. I am ready to embrace my future. And behind me, Madison and Steve were nothing more than a distant memory. Here's the next story. I was fatigued. The 12-hour flight from Tokyo had always been difficult, and it didn't get any easier as I got older. Despite having a good seat in first class on the huge 777, I couldn't get much sleep. I disliked flying not because I was afraid, but because it was so boring, especially the long trans-Pacific routes that took me to clients in Asia, Australia, and New Zealand for a change. Lily agreed to pick me up. She despised driving from our house in Piedmont, East Bay, to San Francisco International. I wasn't sure if it was me or the drive she despised, but I could see things were heating up in our marriage during the last few years. She had begun to feel like a stranger to me as her drinking increased. My pleas for her to seek help were regularly met with angry outbursts. She'd tell me to mind my own business, and I'd try to explain that our marriage was my responsibility. But nothing worked. I hadn't explained why I insisted on her picking me up, but she reluctantly consented, noting that the BART train home would be faster and more convenient. Perhaps for her, it was. But, after such a long travel, I'd rather sit in her comfy Mercedes than in the crammed train seats. I also wanted her undivided attention, and I knew she wouldn't drink while driving, so at least our conversation would start with her sober. But now it was 7:30 a.m. On Sunday, I took the first train of the day from San Francisco International. Lily and I had intended to meet when my aircraft arrived Sunday evening, but my work in Taipei was completed early, so I was able to get an earlier connecting flight out of Tokyo. I must have called Lily around a dozen times before leaving Tokyo, but there was no answer at home or on her cell phone. I was roughly 12 hours ahead of schedule, so I would arrive in San Francisco about 6 a.m. on Sunday. Even if I had contacted her, I doubted she'd agree to get up so early to meet me with no response. My thoughts raced with possibilities. Did she finally leave? It appeared unlikely. Did it matter if she had? I knew I cared. We have been married for more than 20 years and have 2 great children. I had adored her since we were kids living across the street from one another. We grew up together, experiencing many of life's joys, but she also exposed me to the depths of heartbreak. I groaned as I remembered how, during our junior year at Berkeley High, she abandoned me. I was merely a math and scientific geek, whereas she had become an in-crowd cheerleader. We both matured significantly throughout our 6-year apart. I hated it, but I realized I could live without her. I was now determined to find out if I could do it again. Lily's drinking has gotten worse over the last 4 months, particularly since our son Ethan departed for college. Dad, you need to get her some help. I know she drinks a lot, but I've noticed her taking a variety of medicines. I warned her not to expect me home. I love you both, but I can't handle her abuse and contempt. I simply can't. He gently chastised me for being away so much, but said he understood. I'm worried about her father. I want my mommy back. I hugged Ethan and promised to see if I could help her get into rehab. So far, I had been rejected. I intended to tell her today that I was divorcing her. I didn't want to tell her it was therapy or divorce, since I knew she'd fight it. No, I was just going to tell her that I was giving up and that whatever we had was gone. This saddened me deeply. Maybe she'll come around once I've moved out and begun the divorce process. Alcohol was a potent drug, but I knew Lily could handle it. I couldn't figure out what launched her on this self-destructive path and why she refused to get assistance. Did she detest me that much? So there I was, sifting through the Sunday Chronicle. I had the train car almost to myself at that early hour. I paid little heed to the stops as the train went beneath the metropolis. I had hardly noticed the driver's announcement of Brandon Station when I heard the click-clack of high heels on the marble platform of the lonely station. I love women in heels, and glanced over the top of the paper as she entered the car from the opposite end. My heart skipped a beat and my gut clenched when I recognized the woman as Lily. What the hell is she doing? Leaving the city at 8:00 a.m. by train. At that point, what she was wearing entered my befuddled and jet-lagged mind. She is dressed like a 304. She donned a translucent white sleeveless sweater and a red leather skirt. Her dark stocking tops were visible beneath the skirt, with silver suspender clips poking through. She wore red patent leather pumps with stiletto heels. Her auburn hair was slightly ruffled, and there were visible runs in her stockings. She sat with her head down, trying nothing to disguise the tears that streamed down her cheeks. She shuddered. I dropped the paper and observed her more closely. She didn't notice me. My Lily resembled a street hooker on her coming home from a long night. She took a dark leather jacket from the enormous leather tote she carried and wrapped it around her shoulders. I was mesmerized by her. Part of me wanted to soothe her, and a part of me that was outraged wanted to go to her and shake her violently because of her responses about what she had been doing. It was my turn to shiver as a dreadful, rotten feeling spread over my body. How long was this going on? Did she only have one partner, or had she gone to the point of performing tricks at San Francisco hotels? Her cries became more intense as the train rushed beneath San Francisco Bay. She made no attempt to alleviate her anguish. We were alone in the car, and she had still not noticed me sitting 20 feet away. I got out my phone and took numerous photos as we approached the West Oakland station in daylight. What happened to her? To us? Why did she do this? I knew when we got home, I'd face her. I had no idea where I was going, but I promised to collect my belongings and leave today. Drinking was one thing, but this was clearly cheating. Infidelity, damnation, and complaining. It was more like the ultimate humiliation. My heart was bleeding over what we had and what she was throwing away. My despair threatened to consume me. I only had 4 more stops to consider what I would do. I knew it was pointless to confront her on the train or at the station. Hell, I'll probably get arrested now. I would follow her home and confront her there. It wasn't a case of threatening divorce. Threats had been overcome by circumstances. Divorce was a certainty. 8 minutes later, the driver announced the Rockridge station. I waited for her to get off first, but she barely moved. She had her arms wrapped about herself, weeping and shivering, rocking forth and backward. When the door slid open, she appeared to realize she needed to get off. She stepped gently towards the door. When had she become so thin? As soon as her back was turned to me, I grabbed my carry-on luggage and exited via the forward door just as it began to close. I watched her move slowly along the now sun-drenched platform, her head bowed. She took out a handkerchief and wiped her tears. My lovely Lily, my wife, the lady I adored, appeared as unhappy as anyone I'd ever seen. I was devastated, following around 20 feet behind her as she walked down the stairs from the station. I doubt she would have noticed me, even if I had been close next to her. She struggled in the enormous tote for a few moments, until she discovered a little purse, then pulled out her BART ticket, and proceeded through the turnstile. I followed her down the staircase, and into the parking lot, as she approached her new silver Mercedes S-Class. I photographed her as she opened the car, got in, and drove away. I crossed College Avenue to the other parking lot and realized, to my dismay, that I did not have a car at the station. My car was at the dealer for service, and they had dropped me off at the train station for my departing trip, promising to return it to my house once the work was completed. I stood in the light on this sunny Sunday morning, looking for a taxi without success. I mentally shrugged, strapped my backpack to my shoulder, and began walking the 2 miles home. Fortunately, I had dressed casually when I returned. Polo shirt, khaki dockers, a silk and cotton sport coat, and comfy footwear. As I traveled, I passed several seats and considered just sitting and pondering. But I felt it was time for me to hurry home and confront her. Delay would not make matters better. After approximately 10 minutes, I recognized that walking was probably the best thing I could do. The morning air was still chilly, and the sun on my face seemed to rejuvenate me. It also helped me express some of my rage. I knew I could never hurt Lily. When I got at the house, I wondered how she would respond. Will there be tears and apologies? Would it just be a drunken tirade? She appeared heartbroken and fragile, and I wondered she had the strength to fight. What may Ethan and Olivia say? Ethan appeared to understand that our marriage was in danger. Olivia had spent the majority of the previous 4 years at college, but she had to have picked up on the stress in the house and her mother's drinking during her brief visits home. I honestly didn't believe she'd be startled. After around 40 minutes, I climbed the hill to our house, which helped to warm up my stiff muscles. We had lived there for over a dozen years, the majority of them pleasant. I remembered how delighted Lily was when we agreed to buy the house. It had 2 stories of stucco in the Mediterranean style, with a spacious kitchen and a large master bedroom upstairs that included an immense sunken tub and a shower for 2. I recalled our first weekend at the home, and how we made love in both places. Our aspirations had become ashes. I fished my keys from the pocket of my sport coat. As I moved through the main level to the kitchen, the house remained silent. The house was spotless as usual, thanks to Lily's need for cleaning perfection and a cleaning person. Each week, it frequently looked like an upcoming picture shoot for Sunset magazine. Even while drunk, Lily cleaned and scrubbed. I did see a glass and an empty bottle of scotch in the sink. This was odd. I climbed the stairs, yelling Lily's name. I didn't want her to be startled, even though I had no idea what state she'd be in. I fully expected her to have changed her clothes, showered, and possibly fallen asleep in our king-sized bed. She looked like she hadn't slept for weeks. I gently pulled open the double doors to our bedroom, calling her name in case she was sleeping. I had determined that if she was in bed, I would simply leave her there and talk to her later. There was no evidence of her, despite the fact that her 304 clothes were thrown around the floor. That was also unlike Lily. Somehow, my befuddled mind noted there were no panties among the clothes. Through the bathroom door, I heard a song from Lily's favorite album, something by Lily McLaughlin. I thought her music was a little too sugary, but Lily enjoyed listening to it in the bath and in her car. I began turning the knob when Lily's phone beeped, signifying a message. The sound came from a little pocketbook on the dresser. At that point, I spotted the mirror and the use lines for what I assumed was coke. There was also a small bit of coke on the mirror. I wondered whether it was for after she bathed. Good God, Lily, what are you into? A plastic sandwich bag containing white powder was placed next to the mirror. It seemed like a tremendous sum. Where would she obtain so much coke? It must have cost a fortune. Was she supporting her habit by trading sex for narcotics? Oh, Lily. The phone beeped again. I took the phone from her purse and flicked it open, seeing multiple missed calls from the same San Francisco number. I went to her voicemail and entered her password. It had always remained the same. Our daughter's birthday. Lily, baby, where have you gone? We are still enjoying a party here. Call me. The speech was slightly garbled, yet it seemed familiar. I listened to the following message. Lily is a fun baby. You need to come back here. You already know the deal. No more sweets for the baby unless you play. You should come back shortly. That time, I recognized the voice as one of Lily's partners. His name was Alexander Modine. The following message was far more belligerent and demanding. Lily, God damn it. Get your buttocks back here now. We're not finished playing. If you don't return here within the next 10 minutes, all of the images will be sent to your chicken spouse. You do not want him to find out how much a 300 is for you. Or would you? Anyway, you know you enjoy it. Wait a second. Health says he needs you back because he knows you want more of his main tool. I did not listen to the next message. I'd heard enough. Lily had become associated with Alexander and was allegedly consuming coke supplied by Alexander. I was also put off by the fact that Hal Jones was involved, whereas Alexander had always appeared a little oily. How? He seemed like a decent family man, but now this. I leaned against the door, hearing the gentle, almost melancholy singing, and realized it was past time to approach Lily. My hands trembled with wrath as I opened the door. Why, oh why? I entered the restroom, expecting to hear a scream of astonishment or some sort of response from Lily. Instead, she was reclining in a bubble bath, smiling serenely. An empty bottle of champagne lay on its side near the bathtub. On the floor was an amber pill container. It was likewise on its side, and empty. I rushed to her and shook her, enraged, hoping to wake her up to what had injured her in the same way that she had harmed me. Why did you do this? I wanted her to tell me. I still had her phone in my hand and dialed 911. Lily was unresponsive. Fear for Lily overcame all of my wrath. I poured the cooling water from the tub and helped her out. Wrapped her in a big towel. She was so skinny that I could hardly recognize her. She appeared to weigh nothing as I took her to our bed. Lily had always kept her body in shape with food and exercise, but for years she had plenty of womanly curves on her tall frame. I hugged her, and she was ice cold. I took her to bed and covered her with blankets. Her pulse was extremely sluggish, and her respiration was shallow. I knew I needed to respond quickly if she stopped breathing. Please, Lily, do not die. Please do not do this to us. I huddled close to her, wrapping my arms around her to provide her with warmth. I reluctantly left her for a few moments to hide the bag of coke and open the front door. I left the remaining coke on the mirror. I knew the medical professionals would want to know what she'd taken. I stared at the pill container as the siren approached. The pill bottle stated that it should contain 20 pills, and the date on the label indicated that it was purchased a week ago. The thought of losing Lily, of being without my wife, lover, and friend made my stomach spin in knots. Despite what we'd been through in the last few years, I never contemplated letting her die. I knew I still loved her deeply, and I badly wanted her to live. I also knew there would be consequences for those responsible. I heard the aid car pull up, followed by door banging and footsteps. I called down to them. I did not want to let her go. I feared that might be the last time I held her. The two young men and a lovely blonde woman gently pulled her away from me, exposed her, and spread her out across the bed. She appeared pale and thin. She was naked, and I felt embarrassed for her that these strangers would see her in that way. I was also ashamed that I had let her down, failed to seek aid for her, and failed to notice how her physical appearance had changed. I couldn't recall the last time I saw her naked, or when we last had sex. They swiftly began to work on her. A second woman appeared. She softly drew me out the room and out into the corridor. I told her about coming home and discovering her in the bathroom. I handed her the pill bottle and pointed through the door to the coke on the dresser. I also told her about the bottle of champagne in the bathroom next to the tub, as well as the one in the sink downstairs. She left me there and swiftly entered the bedroom to brief the other three. My recall was hazy from that point until I arrived at the hospital some hours later. I recall them transporting her on a stretcher gurney, and one of the men using a bag to breathe for her. She had tubes in her and was wrapped in a huge blanket. Somehow, I was relieved no one could see her nakedness now. There was no space for me in the 8 cars. I followed in her car, and by the time I arrived, she had been eaten up in the emergency room. I dimly remembered a kind young woman guiding me through all of the hospital and insurance forms, before speaking with a police officer. I knew that if one spouse died, or was hospitalized, the other spouse was automatically a suspect. I told him I had just returned home from a 2-week trip to Asia, and had found her. I saw no reason to inform him about meeting her on the train. He inquired if we were experiencing marital troubles. I told him the truth. He eventually left me alone. I was certain he would contact the emergency room. Please review the attached documents before responding. I did manage to contact Olivia and Ethan. I didn't give them much information except that she was really ill, and in the emergency hospital. They both vowed to be there soon. Mr. Anderson. As I sat in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, I heard a distant voice. I wasn't sure how long I had been there. Eventually, I looked up and saw a young man dressed in green scrubs. Mr. Anderson. I nodded, attempting to read his expression. Was he there to tell me that Lily had died? Will you join me, please? I stood on wobbly legs as he pointed to a little office adjacent. I shook my head when he offered coffee. Mr. Anderson, your wife is safe. I didn't hear the remainder of the phrase because I was crying and covering my face with my hands. He left me alone for a few minutes. Finally, a hand touched my back. Mr. Anderson. I'm Dr. Franklin. The younger man had been replaced with an older man wearing green scrubs. Are you okay? Is it enough to talk now? I glanced at him and could only nod. He gave me a drink of water. I sipped it happily. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I understand how tough it is when a spouse attempts suicide, but keep in mind that she will most likely recover completely physically. She is really skinny and dehydrated. She had a lot of booze in her system, sleeping medications, and, of course, coke. In a curious manner, the coke may have protected her from the immediate consequences of the tablets she took. The medics did an excellent job by not waiting to pump her stomach. If you had delayed even 5 minutes before calling for aid, she might not have made it. Can I see her? Yes, but she is still out. And perhaps for a few days. My entire body hurt from a lack of sleep, and the fact that the adrenaline coursing through my body had done its job and left me exhausted. My legs felt like lead as I walked to the intensive care unit. I shook when I stared at her. She looked very pale, and her hair was tucked under a surgical hat. She hardly resembled my Lily, my beautiful love, the mother of our children, and my lifetime companion. The heart monitor indicated a steady, yet slow heartbeat. They informed me that she was on the ventilator only as a precaution. They would take her off once her breathing had steadied. Please do not die, Lily, I whispered. Finally, the ICU nurse led me out, and I found myself in the peaceful hospital cafeteria on a Sunday morning. I was exhausted, but my thoughts wouldn't shut down. I knew I needed to sleep, but it would have to wait. I poured myself a cup of thick black coffee and added cream and sugar. I usually drink my coffee black, but today I needed some additions. I sat in the hard cafeteria chair, reflecting on the years we had spent together, and the events leading up to Lily's suicide attempt. Actually, there was no attempt at it. I didn't know much about the pathology that leads to suicide, but something resonated with me. Many people who try suicide are calling out for help. That wasn't the case for Lily. Both Ethan and Olivia are at school, and I am not expected for another 12 hours. Lily was not crying out for assistance. She was resolved to kill herself, knowing that no one would find her until I arrived home. That night, I shuddered at the memory of that scene. No, Lily was at the airport, and I arrived home to discover her dead in the bathtub. It was a close enough call as it was. What if I'd elected to sit on one of those benches for just a few minutes? I could have avoided the entire situation if I had been brave enough to address her on the train, at the station, or without my silly pride. If I could have gone to her, comforted and held her, and assured her that everything will be fine. No. I sat and watched as she crumbled in front of me. I should have realized I was watching the lady I loved at the end of her rope. Lily was now unconscious upstairs, and half of the blame fell on me. I ignored and abandoned her, as her drinking worsened. Yes, she did everything possible to drive me away, but I was her spouse. Sickness, health, and all that. Was one expecting her to injure me again, like she had done years before? Was this why I constantly held back? Just a bit? Was it a defensive mechanism? I did love her, and I cherished the many beautiful years we had together. Could we ever put Humpty Dumpty back together? I did not know. I wrenched myself free of these thoughts, and forced myself to swallow the now cold coffee. I've made a decision. Now it was time to leave. I had tasks to complete, people to call, and actions to take. Actions I believed would result in punishment against those who had harmed my Lily and wrecked my marriage. I had around 4 hours till Ethan and Olivia arrived. I stood up, looked around the deserted cafeteria, took out my cell phone, and headed outside. It rang once, and I heard a familiar voice. "What up? I need entry to a building." "Where?" "Hers." "Is she okay?" "No, but she will recover while you search for a prox with a blinker and a 23. "You've got it. How much time have I?" "I'll be there in around an hour." "Okay." I stopped by a Chronicle across the street. "Thanks. The first owe you." "No, you don't. Thank you anyway." "Okay, man. I hope she recovers quickly." He hung up the phones and deployed encryption technologies, but we kept our conversation brief. I planned to pay a visit to Madison and Trask's law offices for the phone call. Had visited a longtime acquaintance, who had spent the majority of his life on the other side of the law. We were like the yin and yang of the computer security industry. I had ordered a proximity badge, which would grant me access to Lilly's San Francisco headquarters and all of its offices. The badge would include my photo on it and appear genuine to anyone. It also included a built-in blinker that briefly blinded the security cameras as I moved around the facility. Anyone watching the monitors would see it as a temporary computer fault that resulted in the loss of the video feed from that camera. I also knew that on Sunday mornings, there was usually only one person on duty in the One Market building, so the possibility that he or she would notice a blip on the cameras was slim, even if the security guard was anywhere near the monitor. The 23 was something else entirely. It was a computer virus that he and I created after I downloaded everything from Alexander Modine and Hal Jones' machines. I intended to infect them with a horrible virus that would destroy everything on them beyond repair. Nobody would ever know I had been there. If somebody has the knowledge to trace the bug, it appears to have originated from a cult site outside the country. I might do the same with Lily's PC, depending on what I discover there. Hell, I might take down every server at the law firm. I pulled my collar up and dashed across the street from the hospital to the parking garage. I had a train to catch. I was heading back to Brannan Station. The morning sun had given place to winter darkness and torrential rain. It matched my mood. Lily Anderson paused her restless pacing to see the panoramic vista of San Francisco Bay from her 20th floor condominium. It was about noon on a postcard perfect summer day in the Bay Area. She saw a container ship with a little white splash on its bow approach the Golden Gate. She'd seen so many of them in the last 6 months, and each time she wanted she could be on one, sailing away from her worries and the memories that tormented her. She had no idea where they were going, but she knew it would be better than this velvet jail. Today was her last day at the Redwood, an upscale and very expensive narcotic and alcohol recovery clinic housed in a new high-rise on the waterfront. There were all the amenities of a 5-star hotel, including an exquisite restaurant, room service, a shopping arcade where you could purchase Tiffany or Prada, beautifully decorated rooms, a 24-hour concierge, and a gym and salon that equaled the most expensive health club. It also boasted a fully staffed health clinic, with one more restriction. You couldn't check out or even leave for a short while without your doctor's approval. The Redwood was likewise very pricey. Lily peered around the sun-drenched living room, eventually coming to rest on her reflection in the enormous mirror above the fireplace. She spotted a 45-year-old woman who was gorgeous, tall, and slim, dressed perfectly in an expensive short-sleeve cream silk blouse and a light peach cotton skirt that reached her knees. Her legs were tanned and toned from the gym and salon, requiring no stockings. She was wearing her most recent acquisition, a pair of extremely costly Jimmy Choo high-heeled sandals. Her auburn hair hung carelessly around her shoulders. She looked at herself and noticed that her deep emerald eyes had lost their shine from a few years before. Their anguish was undeniable. She knew she'd depart with no regrets, despite the fact that this institution had helped her sort through her life, which had come to a halt 7 months earlier when she attempted suicide. It was a desperate deed, with no attempt. She had planned to commit suicide if Michael hadn't arrived so early. She did not need to think about that. She needed to go on with her life. Her life without Michael. With that deed, she lost the only man she had ever loved. No, it was not correct. She believed that her affair with Alexander Molina, rather than Michael's suicide, drove him away. It wasn't actually an affair. Alexander just screwed her. And in exchange, she received opioids, which she appeared to crave. She paused her pacing and sat in one of the leather wingback chairs, gazing out at the deep blue sea, the light glinting off the nearly smooth surface. The ship was now almost to the bridge. She shook her head slowly. The affair was not what drove Michael away. It was only the final act that shattered their marriage. She and Dr. Willits have gone through this countless times. Lily's narcotic and alcohol consumption, as well as her inability to listen to Michael and her children, had transformed her into someone she no longer recognized. Instead of being a smiling and happy mother, wife, and paralegal at a top law firm in the city, she'd transformed into a shouting harridan who drove everyone away and whose depression and self-loathing pushed her to engage in reckless and self-destructive activity. No, it was not the affair that ended their marriage. It was the 2.5 years before it. She drove her spouse away with paranoia, unwarranted jealousy, and a lack of closeness. Lily stared at the sea as she waited for her daughter Olivia, her oldest, who had been by her side throughout. She had been a vet student at UC Santa Barbara, and had missed the brunt of Lily's self-destruction and abuse. Her son Ethan, on the other hand, spent his high school years dodging her jabs and avoiding her drug and alcohol-fueled outbursts. Lily seemed to have started her romance with Alexander just a few days after he left for college. Ethan took his leave after an argument in which he finally let her have it. He informed her that he was relieved to be leaving, and that if it were up to him, he would never see her again. He chastised her for her terrible behavior of his father. Why do you believe he is always gone? Do you believe he has a girlfriend? You know better than that. He loves you more than you'll ever know. However, what you're doing to yourself and him is ruining your marriage. I'm glad I'm going out now so I don't have to see the finish of it. He uttered his farewell with such sadness that they pierced her heart. She grieved for hours after he went, but she was too far gone to save herself. The following day at work, one of the partners, Alexander Moline, saw her mood and claimed he had just the thing. The coke was just what she needed, and her feelings of sorrow and grief vanished. She was soon hooked, and Alexander recommended that she earn more narcotics by allowing him to have sex with her. She readily agreed to be escorted to the Hyatt Regency across the street for an afternoon of drugs and sex. Alexander wasn't a beautiful, caring lover like her, Michael. He was brutal with her, treating her like a 304. Lily reacted like a mad woman. She told herself that the sex was the greatest she'd ever had, and Alexander's severe treatment just added to her sense of self-loathing. She also convinced herself that she deserved to be treated like a 304. Olivia was coming today to take her to her new home in the East Bay. It was in El Cerritos just north of Berkeley, on a hill. The view of San Francisco Bay was stunning, and the property was on a quiet street. It cost a fortune, but with the proceeds from the sale of the family house, the law firm settlement, and Michael's large divorce settlement, she didn't have to be concerned about finances. Actually, she wouldn't have to worry about money again. She smiled ruefully. She had never been concerned about money after the first few years of marriage, when Michael's computer systems consulting business took off. She returned to work due to boredom as her children grew older. As a paralegal, she felt needed, and being associated with a famous San Francisco law company gave her a great sense of self-worth. Olivia had graduated the month before, and Dr. Willits granted Lily permission to fly to Santa Barbara for the ceremony. She knew Michael would be there, so she tried to look her best. She donned a green silk top with a knee-length skirt and high-heeled sandals that made her legs look longer. She was thrilled to see that her appearance continued to attract attention, but she was disappointed to see the grief in Michael's eyes when they sat together at the graduation. He was a striking man who appeared younger than his 45 years. He participated in activities such as running, swimming, golf, and tennis. At 61 years old and weighing roughly 185 pounds, he exuded natural confidence, which helped him succeed. Lily felt happy to be with him, and enjoyed the attention they received as a pair. But deep down, she knew their relationship was no longer genuine. She was confident that Michael no longer loved her. How had it come to this? She realized there was little hope of reconciliation. Unfortunately, she knew there would almost definitely be another Miss S. Anderson. Michael was too good a man, and his blonde hair and gentle gray eyes made him irresistible even when she was high on drugs and drink. She told herself he was having an affair, but she realized it was just an excuse to hide the guilt of her own actions. Despite her inner hurt and sentiments of loss, she managed to keep herself together during the graduation and make small talk. He had been quite solicitous, as he had been during her rehabilitation. But the love was gone. He had stated early on that her betrayal of him and the family made it unlikely that they would ever live together again as husband and wife. While still in the hospital, she asked him to forgive her and give her a second chance. But it was like waves crashing against a rock. He was so devastated by her treachery that he couldn't see how it could ever work. She sat in front of a crowd of proud parents and relatives, a phony grin on her face, lost in contemplation. Soon after the final speaker finished, the graduates began to traverse the bright stage to get their diplomas. Olivia lifted her up, and Lily clutched Michael despite everything. She was overjoyed as their oldest child walked down the steps. Her grin is beautiful. Lily felt Michael relent and embrace her back. Her heart jumped and then dropped as she felt him stiffen and release her. Even as tears streamed down her cheeks, she smiled at their daughter. For a brief moment, she could feel the old loving Michael, the Michael who had loved her for so long. Perhaps there was hope. She and Michael stood and talked for a while after the ceremony, waiting for Olivia to reappear. Lily was astonished to find Michael was taking flying lessons. She knew he had always wanted to be a pilot, and she saw him smile as he discussed the intricacies of coping with the 3 dimensions of flight. They both were relieved when Olivia rejoined them. She was ecstatic about her graduation, and the fact that she would be starting law school in Berkeley in the fall. Lily was relieved that Olivia would be living with her, at least initially. "I know Dad still loves you." Olivia's speech trailed off as her mother dabbed tears from her eyes. They drove calmly for a few miles along highway, one admiring the light and beauty of coastal California, as they headed north to San Francisco. Lily glanced at her gorgeous, confident daughter, trying to imagine her in a courtroom. She had to hide her blonde hair from both parents, as well as her father. She was an attractive young woman. There had always been boys around, but no one had ever managed to capture her heart. Perhaps her parents' struggles made her gun-shy. "Olivia is someone I know, and this is what makes it so difficult." Seeing and being around him on days like this, days that were always anticipated and would be filled with love and happiness. I saw what I did to him. Seeing him without the love that once filled his eyes, he stared at me. God, how could I be so stupid? You should quit beating yourself up. Dr. Willett advised you to give it time. And you and your father need time to heal. Lily gave no response. She reflected on how much the doctor had helped her, but she still wished her suicide attempt had been successful. She realized she couldn't tell Olivia or Dr. Willits. She and Michael did need time to mend, but for what purpose? Lily gazed at the sky through the open sunroof of her daughter's BMW. "I enjoyed seeing the two of you together today." Olivia explained that there had been a long stretch of silence before. "Is he still proceeding with the divorce?" "Yes," she said. "It's really soft." Olivia barely heard her. They traveled silently for quite some time after that, each lost in her own thoughts. Their last meeting was barely a few weeks ago. Michael sat next to her on the big couch in her Redwood apartment, while she cried. They were scheduled to negotiate the property settlement. She knew it was the last deed of their marriage. Their union had come to an end, and they were alone. Michael filled her with fear. She urgently wanted to feel his arms around her once more. But he couldn't do it. He spoke quite quietly. "Lily, you should understand. The pain and misery of the last several years have been so engraved in my psyche that I can't get rid of it. No matter how much I love and miss you, or the Lily I married. You betrayed me and our family, and I will never allow myself to be harmed by you again. I know you remember the vow you made 23 years ago. You said you would never hurt me again. You claimed I was your only love, and had always been, and you apologized, and had been very stupid to let me escape, and that you had missed me so much. You promised." He departed the apartment, but not before she noticed the tears. The chime of the doorbell returned Lily's thoughts to the present. It was time to go and begin a new chapter in her life. A period without the man she had been married to for more than 20 years. Mrs. Lily Anderson. Lily was shocked to see a tall, gorgeous, sandy-haired man dressed in a gray suit at her door. She had expected Olivia. Yes. He brought out an identity wallet and said, "I'm Special Agent Geoff Cameron from the FBI. May I come in?" Lily only gazed at him for a few moments. "Yes. Come inside." She took him to the living room. She had already spoken with police and prosecution attorneys extensively in preparation for her evidence against Alexander Modine, but she was aware that the case had been settled through a plea agreement. She had made every effort to forget about Alexander and their affair. It wasn't truly an affair. It was only sex. Trading sex for drugs. It was worse than an affair. The FBI's arrival brought up all of those memories. Her stomach knotted. She flushed as she watched his gaze move across her body. She hadn't thought about sex in a nice way in months, so she was grateful that this attractive man would gaze at her like that. She swiftly dismissed such ideas, feeling guilty all over again. What exactly was wrong with her? Of course, she was no longer married. So, what difference does it make? "What can I do for you, Agent Cameron?" "I would want to ask you a few questions concerning Alexander Modine." Lily's stomach tightened up. Just hearing the name. She swiftly sat in the chair near the window, knees weak, and felt as if she had been struck. After a few moments, she glanced up and apologized. "Please take a seat." She pointed to the wide, leather-covered couch that faced the bay. "Mrs. Anderson, are you okay?" Lily nodded. "Please call me Lily. I'm no longer Mrs. Anderson. I am sad to hear that. I will attempt to be brief." Lily shivered as she waited. "Do you recall when you last saw Mr. Modine?" Lily became white, and was worried she'd lose her food. She tightened her fists as she recalled the horror of that Saturday night, When Alexander had injected her with coke and alcohol and brought in another partner in the firm and a hooker, they had screwed her all night. The next morning, she rushed to her home and attempted suicide. She spoke with a trembling voice. A Saturday night nearly 7 months ago. That should have been the last time it appeared in the police reports. She shed tears. You haven't seen him since. She shook her head and inspected her hands. Sorry, Mrs. Anderson. Lily. I'm not sure whether you've heard, but Mr. Modine disappeared a week ago today. Vanished? She looked at him and spoke quietly. I'm not particularly surprised. Alexander is an opportunist and a coward. Given the circumstances, I'm amazed he stayed so long. However, there is more to it than that. He did not bring much with him, merely his car keys, wallet, and passport. Everything else is still in his condominium. We haven't found his automobile yet either. We believe he was gone for almost 8 hours before his disappearance was noticed. We were likewise confident he would show up soon, but he has vanished. I assumed he had made some sort of arrangement for his testimony. Maybe the narcotics folks got to him. Cameron simply gazed at her. Maybe. Am I suspect? You must understand our past. And up until a few weeks ago, I was going to testify against him until the prosecution reached an agreement with him for a plea. Do you think I'd go after him myself? Because I believe that would be insufficient punishment. Her voice had raised in rage as she spoke. Agent Cameron raised his hands, palms facing her. Mrs. E.R., Lily, you are not a suspect. We know you didn't leave the Redwood that night. We spoke with security and even studied the security camera CDs. Then why? Why am I here? She nodded. It affects your hubby. Her stomach lurched again. Was Michael involved in Alexander's disappearance? Had she driven him to murder Alexander? Do you know where your ex-husband was a week ago today? No. We don't see each other often. And he travels primarily to Asia. What? Lily did not tell Special Agent Cameron. Was their divorce finalized exactly 1 week ago? Lily's attorney called in the afternoon to inform her. She walked into her bedroom, put the covers over her head, and sobbed for hours. Michael had found her before she died, something he regretted. Special Agent Cameron, I have to tell you that, regardless of what I or Alexander did, I don't believe Michael had anything to do with Alexander's disappearance. He's always been a kind and polite man. Our acts really hurt him. But, however, there is someone who wishes to hurt Alexander. No, Lily. I believe your ex-husband had the motive and opportunity to make Mr. Modine disappear. Modine ruined your marriage. Let us get one thing straight, Agent Cameron. Alexander Modine didn't end my marriage. I did. I am completely at fault. Alexander was only the catalyst for calamity. Cameron thought for a few moments. Your ex-husband may not view it that way. She didn't respond. Lily. Do you know what your husband did during his 4 years in the Marine Corps? No. We weren't together then. Only after Lily's voice trailed off as she battled nausea from recollections of how they lost contact and how he reappeared in her life. Actually, she was the one who lost Michael. Let him go. Nothing worse. She had rejected him, only to discover that she had made a terrible and stupid mistake. Lily joined the Marines. Your husband? Sorry? Your former husband was a sharpshooter. His records show that he killed 46 men. Lily felt dizzy. She had no idea or imagined Michael had changed significantly following his service, but they never discussed it. She attributed it to growing up in a difficult branch of the military. I spoke with his former commander, who told me that the actual count was probably twice as high. He was known as Ace Anderson. He never missed. He was in the worst of places, including the Middle East, Central America, Africa, and Afghanistan, under the Soviets. It's a challenging job, but it was more than 20 years ago. I understand, and I apologize for bringing this up, but he is killed. And he was quite adept at it. Lily was shocked. Lily, does your hubby have a gun? She shakes her head. I've never seen Michael carry a gun. I would never have permitted one in my house. Even in the few images from his time in the Marines, the first never saw him with a weapon. He wrote down a note in a little notebook he pulled from his pocket. You may ask why the FBI is currently examining this case. The FBI, and the U.S. Attorney for California, are concerned about the disappearance of a witness in a case that has the potential to bring down some large international narcotics traffickers. The quantities turned over by an anonymous source during the search of Mr. Modine's office and home revealed that he was a prominent player in the Bay region. Do you desire immunity for his testimony against a number of narcotics dealers in and around the city, as well as potentially larger fish? Fortunately, he testified before a grand jury, and multiple indictments were issued just a few weeks ago. Regardless, ATF failed to maintain his monitoring, and he vanished. Conventional wisdom holds that his narcotics selling pals got to him. I'm not too sure. He peered at the ocean below. as if he had finally made a decision. He continued, I should also inform you that another partner in your firm was severely beaten the same night. What? Who? Harold Jones. The shocks kept coming. The memory of that last night at the Hyatt, when Hell took advantage of her while Alexander encouraged him, made her head spin. How was a married man with 2 children and a devoted wife? Lily had never expected him to betray her in such a way. He had informed her that he had admired her for years and hoped to make that night unforgettable. Despite the opiates and alcohol, she understood his actions were wrong and regretted what she had said, feeling humiliated for having agreed to something that had no regard for her feelings or well-being. Is he dead? No. However, he may never walk normally again. They beat him up quite well with a pipe. Mr. Jones had many fractures, including both kneecaps. His assailant understood what he was doing. Just enough to severely injure him, but not enough to kill him. When Jones recovered consciousness, he claimed he never saw his attacker and assumed it was a nasty mugger. He was not particularly cooperative. Lily was stunned. Lily, my duty is to put puzzles together. I follow the money or the motives. I believe Harold was engaged in what happened to you in some way. He worked in the same firm as you. He had been a friend of Mr. Modine for several years, dating back before he married. The hospital tox screen also revealed coke in his system the night he was attacked. You're the logical link. And we know your husband knew about you and Alexander Modine. Lily gazed at him. She was stunned by the news, but she had to confess she felt oddly delighted. Alexander Modine was most certainly dead, and Harold Jones may never walk again. But Michael is the avenging angel. She had trouble absorbing the concept. Plus, how would Michael know what was going on in that hotel room on Saturday night? She'd never told anyone about that detail. She felt too ashamed. Would you like to tell me about him? Agent Cameron? Everything came out during the police inquiry. This is all I have to say. Everything had come out during the police probe. An anonymous source had informed the police that Alexander was a drug dealer and that Lily was somehow linked with him. Michael was present when the cops came to visit her in her hospital room. After the cops left, she confessed to Michael and pleaded for his forgiveness. She knew her suicide attempt and his discovery of her had upset him, but the fury and sadness he expressed after hearing her narrative scalded her like escaping steam. After that, he never touched or held her, no matter how much she needed him. How would Michael have known about Hell? Perhaps it was a random mugging. No, that was too coincidental. What more did Michael know? She was struggling to keep the nausea under control. Cameron sat silently and watched her. I apologize. I don't think I can help you. She shivered while saying it. Oh. Do not worry. I'll keep plugging away. This is what I do. He stood beside the way. Have you ever heard the name Darwin? Has your husband ever mentioned it? No, I do not think so. Why? He ignored her query. How about Stephen Shields? That was a name she recognized. She hadn't heard the name since high school. The only Stephen Shields I know, or recall, is my husband's best friend from high school. But that happened a long time ago. Mr. Shields is wanted in multiple nations. He's wanted for a variety of computer crimes, including robbing banks by exploiting flaws in their security systems and stealing millions from individuals, businesses, and governments worldwide. He considers himself a kind of Robin Hood and goes by the moniker Darwin. We assume that many of his victims do not disclose the thefts because they involve unlawful money or items. Regardless, we believe he and your husband have maintained in touch and are helping each other. Agent Cameron, the first sure you're mistaken. I haven't seen or heard of Stephen Shields since high school, and I am sure Michael hasn't either. They were pals in high school, but how would you reconnect after so many years? Miss S. Anderson, you may not recall, but your husband did not attend his high school graduation. Another horrible recollection poured over Lily. She certainly remembered. She saw herself seated in the auditorium, an often postponed gift for him on her lap, and an empty chair next to her where Michael was scheduled to sit. He was detained a week before graduation, along with his friend Stephen Shields. What? They appeared to be skilled computer people. Even then, it was a joke that allowed them to access multiple budding scientific and government computer systems via the freshly established system at UC Berkeley. Security was virtually non-existent at the time, and they had created their own hacker gadgets. Stephen posted bond, and the charges were eventually withdrawn. To be honest, other than a misdemeanor trespassing charge, there were no laws in place at the time to hold them accountable for their actions. Lily couldn't speak, let alone answer. Your ex-husband made a mistake when he refused bail. He did speak with his parents, but he still rejected bail. He begged the magistrate to allow him to join the Marines. The prosecutor dismissed the accusations, and the recruiter took him. He didn't seem to care about anything. He only wanted to go away. Stephen Shields attended to Cal Poly and majored in math and engineering. He was hired by a tiny Silicon Valley startup to assist in the development of security software. He worked there for around 6 years. One day, he submitted his resignation and vanished. Lily, could you guess the name of the Silicon Valley company? She knew the answer. Elkhorn, she spoke quietly. Yes. After Michael graduated from Cal Poly, he and her husband spent at least 2 years working at Elkhorn together. I wonder how he got that job. He asked pointedly. We're pretty sure Stephen, aka Darwin, lives in the Bay Area somewhere. Why are you telling me this? Your husband is not who you believe he is. And I believe he is heavily engaged in the disappearance of Alexander Modine and the attack on Harold Jones. I don't know what to say to Agent Cameron. I had no idea Stephen and Michael worked together, let alone what he did in the Marine Corps. But I can promise you that Michael had nothing to do with Alexander Mallin's disappearance or the harm to Hal Jones. Her remarks also sounded unclear to her. Lily, Mr. Modine's building's security cameras malfunctioned on the night he went missing. Lobby cameras, elevator cameras, and the camera in the hallway outside his dorm all malfunctioned for around 5 minutes. Cameron looked at his notes. 10:02 p.m. A short time later, cameras in the west side stairway went blank, as did the camera right outside the building at the base of the steps. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the building or at Mr. Modine's condo. I'm not sure much about these security cameras, but our admins say they've heard stories that several of our federal agencies have gadgets that could cause this. Lily could see where Cameron was going with his special agent Cameron. My husband is a respected businessman and a non-violent guy. Simply knowing about computers and computer security software, as well as having previously worked with Stephen Shields, does not make him any more involved than I am. He could simply be a computer glitch. Cameron simply gazed at her. He wasn't convinced. Lily led him to the door. His card is in her hand. Thank you, Lily, for speaking with me. I hope you love your new house in El Cerritos. Good luck. She shut the door and stood for a long time. She hadn't told Elsa Prieto about her move. Special Agent Cameron was thorough. More significantly, was Michael a murderer? Was he a cybercriminal? After 23 years of marriage, she started to see him in a different way. Did his actions indicate that he still cared for her? Or was it merely retaliation against the men who had harmed and taken advantage of her? Did he intend to harm her too? How could he harm her any farther than he already had? She shook her head, as if she could make all these thoughts disappear. She gazed at herself in the mirror once again. She noticed a really miserable woman with tear-streaked makeup. No, Michael loved her too much to physically harm her. His vengeance was simply his absence and a realization that she would never feel his arms around her again. Finally, in despair, she sat on the couch and stared at the blue water of the bay, unable to see it. Oh, Michael, what did I do? What did I do? I have been such an idiot. I love you. She sat and let the tears fall again. What a delightful surprise. Thank you, Olivia. Lily cuddled her daughter and gazed around the living room. Olivia had managed to unload most of her stuff and make the place livable. The living room and dining room tables were decorated with fresh flowers and vases. The huge sofa was just as Lily had envisioned. It was facing San Francisco Bay on the Golden Gate Bridge. The view was breathtaking on this ideal summer day, stretching from the Richmond Bridge in the north to downtown San Francisco in the south. Lily adored the tranquility of this location, and she felt the quiet would help her heal. She still had weekly sessions with Dr. Willits for the foreseeable future, but she was confident that the worst had passed. She frowned, believing that the worst of her illness and fight with booze and narcotics had passed. But her life without Michael was only beginning, and it was the worst. She had never considered such a thing. Never believed things might deteriorate to the point where Michael would abandon her. She realized she should have known better, because it had occurred before, and she had almost lost him. She had taken him for granted then, as she probably does now, and her reckless foolishness pushed him away. She was grateful that Olivia would be living with her while she attended law school. Olivia, her eldest, was always the cool-headed, analytical kind. She was also the pragmatic one, appearing to tolerate individuals and their flaws. Lily attempted to reconcile with Ethan, but he was stubborn like his father, and he was struggling to overcome the injuries he had sustained at her hands. Even though he knew his mother had been suffering from alcohol and cocaine, addiction, and depression, with the help of Dr. Willits, Ethan was gradually coming to recognize that her treatment of him was a manifestation of her disease, rather than a lack of love. Lily was aware that he correctly blamed her for the marriage's dissolution, as a result of his father's horrific treatment. Lily could only express regret and apologies. He was still exhausted, but she was convinced he would eventually embrace the return of his loving and caring mother. "Are you ready for lunch?" Lily turned to see Olivia arranging plates of sandwiches on the dining room table. It was one step up from the living room and adjacent to the kitchen. They enjoyed the same vista of San Francisco Bay. They ate and sipped their tea quietly for several minutes each, lost in thinking. So what happens now? What happens now? What? Lily smiled at her daughter, knowing she was asking about her intentions. She was not going back to Madison or Trask. That was a predictable outcome after Alexander Modine was detained and the police, ATF, and IRS pounced on the firm. It barely survived. After paying fines and settling lawsuits brought by Lily and other firm members who had been victims of Alexander and others, the firm was significantly smaller. The company had left its costly downtown San Francisco office premises and relocated to Oakland. Lily realized she needed to go back to work for her own sanity. I return to work next week. You know, a female has to pay her rent. Now it was Olivia's turn to smile. I knew you wouldn't be able to just sit here and enjoy the scenery, but I expected you to take some time. Olivia, I've been caged up in the redwoods for too long. I need to be able to get outside and accomplish something. Lily frowned as she realized she had been thinking about this moment for years. When the kids were out of the house, and she and Michael were financially secure, she could travel to the locations she had always wanted to visit. Now she was going to work to pass the time and focus on something other than Michael's death. Olivia poured tea as they put away the lunch dishes and snuggled into the large sofa. So, what is the job? It's a paralegal position with a lady in solo practice. She used to work for one of the larger corporations in town. Had an affair with one of the younger partners. Her marriage exploded. Lily wiped her tears with the back of her palm and attempted to smile. This sounds familiar, doesn't it? Olivia took her hand, frightened by her mother's sudden sadness. Mother, I only wish there was something I could do. Lily took a tissue from the jar on the coffee table in front of them, dabbed her eyes, and tried again to smile. Anyway, her name is Helene. Helen Connor's office is in the 100 Stewart building. It's directly behind a market where I used to work. Mike and Tom's coffee cart is really located on the corner in front. It's where I always get my morning chai. Lily smiled sadly. Nice. I don't have to seek for a good chai anyway. Helen has recently moved into the building. She was up on Geary Street, but she needed more space because her practice was growing. So she decided to hire a paralegal. I'm not sure how she found out about me, but she called me one day at the Redwood, and later came to see. We've had lunch several times, and I genuinely enjoy her. Her ex, also named Michael, was a mergers and acquisitions expert in town. However, once their marriage failed, he left to work for an international shipping business for a few years, before launching the largest private investigation firm in the Bay Area. She hesitated, blinking away tears alongside his new bride. Mother, you can't believe Dad is even thinking about that. Anyway, he still loves you. I know he isn't seeing anyone. He travels, and when he returns, he simply stays in his condominium. Do you think there's a chance? Lily hung her head. More tears fell. I listened to him so much. I'm not sure if he will ever forgive me. Olivia witnessed her mother's anguish. He's hurting, but I can't imagine he won't realize one morning that you two belong together. Olivia, I never told you that I broke up with your father throughout high school. I was dumb and drove him away. Years later, he forgave me, but I pledged never to hurt him again. But I did, right? As tears streamed down her cheeks, she spoke. What, Mother? Ethan and I both know the story. Grandma and Grandpa Andrews must have repeated it 100 times throughout the years. You and Dad live across the street from each other. Friends since you were babies, walking to school together, and marrying after Dad left the Marine Corps. What happened? Olivia was astonished to see her mother lowering her head and slowly shaking her head. Lily's eyes glistened when she finally glanced at her daughter. That is the sanitized version. We started together and eventually got married. But I almost lost your father. Well, I took his affection for granted. I was immature and dumb. Olivia, surprised, simply observed her mourning mother. Lily paused to take a big breath. It all began in the spring of our sophomore year of high school, when I was chosen for the pep squad. I had wanted to be a cheerleader for years, and now my dream has come true. Your father and I were not dating. We just were. We traveled and spent time together. We were a couple. We walked to school every day. Olivia grinned, seeing her parents as teenagers. We were only a few weeks from the end of school when I learned about the pep squad. I was elated. And as we went home from school, I kept telling your father how excited I was. I admit that his reaction disappointed me. He was my best buddy, and I wanted him to be excited too. However, I did detect some. Well, I had no idea what it was. Like an idiot, I assumed he was jealous. I'm not sure why I thought that. Your father always appeared to be the most self-assured person. Lily focused on the river in the distance, gathering her thoughts. Even so, he was tall. But he was slender. And I suppose you call him a math and scientific freak. He excelled in school. I had to work hard for my math and science grades, and I was grateful to have him aid. But he was never a show-off. Olivia replenished their cup, while listening to her mother. Things between us became difficult during the next few weeks. Maybe not with your dad. He either did not notice or claimed not to. Things improved as the summer progressed, and it came time for our yearly trip to Tahoe. You are aware that your grandparents were longtime friends, and we used to spend nearly 2 weeks at the lake every year. It was an amazing experience. They always rent a couple of cabins and a ski boat, and we spend our time outside water skiing or roaming through the woods looking at the stars. Lily sat back, recalling the summer on the lake. Toward the end of the first week, your father and I were laying on the pontoon on the lake, watching the stars appear, when we unexpectedly kissed. We had not kissed before. Actually, I'd never kissed a boy before. And I was certain your father had never kissed a girl. I learned he was an excellent kisser. Lily paused and drank her tea, her eyes gleaming. We lay there for a long time, holding hands and gazing at the stars. I shook as I pressed up against him. We were only wearing our swimwear. I also recall a warm breeze across the lake. Then he stated something that struck me as weird. You will not forget me, will you? I rolled on top of him, feeling his warmth, and told him in the darkness that he had always been my best friend. He sat quiet for a minute before saying, I never want us to be apart. And with your schedule for next year. I just gazed at him and crushed myself against him, telling him I would never forget him and that I never wanted us to be apart. The rest of our time at the lake was magical. I know our parents saw a change in us. There wasn't the usual roughhousing and teasing. We had become a couple. Oh, we never got beyond kissing in some light body exploration. But there seemed to be plenty of time for more. Lily collected her thoughts as she glanced out at the metropolis across the harbor. Unfortunately, I did not listen to him. She paused again. All of that changed a few weeks later, when cheer camp started. Suddenly, I was immersed in the new life of a cheerleader, and I barely had time for your father. Before I could think, school started. For the first time in my life, I didn't attend the Andersons' Labor Day BBQ. I'd been asked to a pool party given by the head cheerleader, Melinda Nielsen. Her parents were out of town, so there was plenty of booze and a large group of older boys. I enjoyed the attention and the sense of belonging in this new community. The lovely people in the audience at Berkeley High. I faintly recall my mother telling me that your father had come by a few times, but I couldn't be bothered to call him. Then it was the first day of school. Lily stood by the deck's French doors, peering out at the lake. How could I have been so stupid? Stupid. She finally returned to the sofa. He caught up to me in the crowded hallway between courses. I was with other cheerleaders, and we were dressed in our uniforms for the pep rally later that day. And he mentioned stopping by my house that morning, and my mother telling him I had already left. I was uncomfortable that a math nerd was chatting to me in front of my new pals, so I explained that I had taken a trip with Jessica. Lily paused to wipe her tears. He realized from my tone that we would never walk to school together again. I turned and walked away with the other girls. The worst part was when one of them said geek so loudly that the majority of the folks in the hall could hear it. I'm ashamed to admit that I laughed along with the others as we walked away. I barely saw him the rest of our junior year. We had no classes together, and he wasn't a jock, so he didn't attend the games or other meets. Lily halted again, remembering those days from nearly 20 years ago. That Christmas, for the first time, your father did not attend my parents' Christmas party. An open house. I was dating a football player at the time, and didn't give it much attention until I was helping my mother clean up after the party. When I asked her if she liked Tony, she gave me the mother. It appears that you are not taking yourself seriously. Tony played football and had. Well, it should have been your father. To him, I was simply another notch in his belt, and he was an insensitive jerk who was nowhere near the kisser. Your father was. He wasn't a decent lover, but I didn't know better. Like I said, I was stupid. She shakes her head. Then your grandmother mentioned that she hadn't seen or heard anything from your father since the summer. Mom, just let that thought sit there. I tried to reassure her that I was certain he was occupied. Actually, I had no idea why he hadn't arrived. His parents had been there, but I had not spoken with them. A strange sense of uneasiness washed over me. I couldn't recall the last time your father and I had spoken. Unfortunately, a few days later, I had completely forgotten about it. The chat with grandmother and the celebration. Olivia approached her mother and wrapped her arms around her, as Lily continued. It's almost summer again, and one day I was with another cheerleader named Rachel. We'd gone to the Berkeley public pool to pick up her younger brother. When we came in, I was surprised to see your father. He worked as a lifeguard and swim instructor and was nothing short of a hottie. He had grown to his full height, and his skin was bronzed from the sun. He was only wearing a white tank top and a dark blue Speedo. I approached him and inquired how he was doing, and Rachel gave me a look like, "You know this guy, and you haven't introduced me to him." I did introduce her, and her curiosity was so blatant it was repulsive. As we stood there conversing, I could definitely smell the heat radiating from her. A lovely blonde girl approached and wrapped her arm through his, clearly claiming her claim. She was stunning, with model-like height and shape, dressed in a man's white shirt over a tiny yellow two-piece. Lily glanced at her daughter, soothed by her care. As the memories threatened to overtake her, I realized I knew who she was. She was the younger sister of Melinda, our top cheerleader. Her name was Maya, and she was going to be a junior this autumn. I noticed how your father stared at her, and then it hit me. He used to stare at me like that. I went home and grieved for several days. I'd been stupid. And now he's gone. The thrill and excitement of being a cheerleader appeared to vanish like air from a balloon. I stuck with it. Of course, there was no turning back. When school resumed in the fall, I saw them everywhere, at social gatherings, games, and holding hands in the hallway. My social life has dried up. I realized how much I adored your father, but had taken him for granted. Lily paused her story and said, much like I did this time. Olivia hugged her mother, amazed by the narrative. She recognized how upsetting it was for her mother, and understood why she hadn't heard it earlier. She must have loved you though. You wound up with him. You must have done something correctly. Olivia saw more tears fall as she waited for her mother's response. I remember your father's parents attending the Christmas celebration that year. He told me he was skiing with Maya and her family at Whistler Resort, in British Columbia, over the holidays. I got your father a leather-bound journal, and planned to deliver it to him at the celebration. I'm not sure why I believed he'd arrive. I had a dreadful Christmas. Your grandmother was really compassionate and helped me get through it. She told me that certain things were meant to be, while others were not. She's a clever woman who basically urged me to go on with my life. Olivia was speechless. It was difficult for her to imagine what it had been like for both of them in high school. When school began again in January, everything was different. There was no indication of Maya. Your father was only seen sporadically. There were dreadful rumors going throughout the school. Rumors circulated that your father had battered and attacked Maya when they were in Canada, and that your father would have to return to Canada to stand trial. My acquaintance who worked in the vice principal's office confirmed that the vice principal had had a few conversations with the BC Police and Canadian Mounted Police. We discovered that Maya had transferred to Piedmont High, and your father was primarily pursuing independent studies, which kept him away from school. Olivia stared at her mother. She was unsure how to answer. She couldn't fathom her father doing it, let alone being accused of it. Mom, what did you think? Red eyes. She gazed up at her daughter. I was completely confused. I wasn't sure what to think. I thought I knew your father's warmth and gentleness. But the rumors didn't go away. One day, I even asked Melinda, but she told me she couldn't discuss it, since there was an ongoing investigation. Your father disappeared as we approached graduation. However, if you wanted to graduate, you had to attend the ceremony. I knew he had to be there, and since we were next to each other, I'd be seated next to him. I even brought the diary I got him for Christmas, but he didn't come up that night. I didn't attend graduation. Lily dried her eyes and continued on. After graduation, Melinda hosted a massive party at her residence. I wasn't seeing anyone at the moment, so I assumed I'd just make an appearance. I drank a few beers and went upstairs to use the restroom, because there was a line downstairs. When I left the bathroom, I went past Maya's room. The door was slightly ajar, and she was with her sister. I saw them sitting on the bed, heard them talking, and paused to listen. I'm not sure why Melinda was trying to get her to attend the party, but I overheard Maya tell her that she couldn't, and she wasn't in the mood to be among her inebriated friends. Melinda then asked her, "When are you going to snap out of it?" and told her she couldn't keep herself locked up indefinitely for some scumbag who wasn't even good enough for her. I wasn't sure what I was hearing, but I had a hunch it was about your father. However, I was surprised when Maya defended him. Maya instructed her sister not to call him names before claiming responsibility. It was all her fault. She cried as she spoke. Melinda yelled at her to stop sobbing, saying he should have been more understanding, that she despised him, and that he was a jerk. I was very perplexed as I listened, and I considered leaving, but then Maya sobbed and said something like, "He's kind and wonderful, and he loved her, and she betrayed him, and he was so angry she just wanted to die." Melinda said she didn't care what she did to your father, but she knew he had hurt her younger sister, and she made him pay. And Maya was outraged and asked Melinda what she'd done. And she said she fixed him by spreading stories throughout the school that he was an animal. And he assaulted her while they were in Canada for Christmas. Maya collapsed on the bed, screaming and saying no, no, no. Melinda then claimed to have persuaded the vice principal to contact the British Columbia police. Maya only gazed at her sister, tears streaming down her cheeks, and she became white as her sister mentioned that she had gotten their father to help as well. Melinda claimed she learned from Sherry at the guidance office that your father, whom she referred to as that scumsucker, applied to college and made some phone calls. She informed Maya that her ex-boyfriend had learned that Stanford, Caltech and Berkeley were no longer interested in accepting him as a student. Melinda sat next to her sister, her face beaming with triumph, while Maya lay on the bed, arms wrapped around herself, crying. Olivia, that's how I discovered that the rumors about your father were all false. I never found out what prompted his separation with Maya, but she must have devastated him deeply. Something happened up in Canada that killed his feelings for her, and he wanted nothing more to do with her. She still loved him. It was evident from what I saw. I was so upset that I left the party and never spoke with Melinda again. My God, Mother. What a dreadful situation for Dad. He must have heard the whispers, but he loved her so much that he chose not to defend himself. Perhaps he was so crushed by her that he didn't care. Lily responded, Did you tell Dad what you heard? No. I didn't see your father until he returned from the Marines nearly 4 years later. I assumed you'd want to tell him I did, but when I got to his place the next day, everyone had left. His parents had relocated to South Carolina. I asked my mother about it, and she claimed she had told me a few weeks ago that they were moving, and that she was upset that her best friends would be across the country. Obviously, I was so caught up in myself that I didn't hear or ignore her. Not unusual for a teen girl. She looked at Olivia, attempting to smile. I didn't know your father was in the Marines until later. I believe Mom received a letter from the Andersons. At that point, I think I just gave up on ever being with your father again. For a long time, I thought of him every day. However, while at Cal, I resumed dating. So, what happened? What happened? It was Olivia's turn to try to smile. Yes. How did you and your father reconcile? I mean, clearly you did. She noticed her mother's eyes shift back to the lake. Olivia, enough of this for now. I'm worn out. I think I'll go lie down for a while. Lily Anderson lay on top of her grandmother's quilt in her new bedroom. She knew she wouldn't be able to sleep soon in her unfamiliar surroundings. And in the new bed. After 6 months in the redwoods, she longed for the peace and quiet that this home provided. But the peacefulness couldn't stop her mind from racing like a locomotive. Her confession, more akin to one with her daughter, brought back memories of those years in college when she felt lost without Michael. She found herself in the same situation again. She smiled at the irony. She was a strong, independent woman who had kept a home, worked at a famous legal firm, raised 2 great children, and shared the duties and pleasures of a long and stable marriage. But, to what end? Her emotional life was in tatters. For want of her mate, companion, love, or the love of her life. The misguided wretch who said, "A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bike," had never met Michael. He was a Renaissance guy, articulate, interesting, educated, and strong, with a keen interest in a variety of subjects. He was also committed to his family. Above all, he emphasized loyalty. She'd betrayed his loyalty and trust. Lily reflected on that midsummer night more than 20 years ago, when Michael re-entered her life. At the time, she hadn't seen him in almost 4 years. She graduated from UC Berkeley, with a degree in finance and accounting, and now works in the university's finance office. Lily dated intermittently, and continued to live with her parents, while looking for an apartment. It was after 11 p.m. on a Friday night, and she was with a group of work pals, including her best friend Christine, Susan Yee, and Sean Davis. James Morgan, who she had dated a few times, rounded out the group. He had become possessive, and finally she informed him she regarded him a friend, and nothing more. To her annoyance, he persisted to hang around. They had gone for drinks after work, and she couldn't recall who had suggested they adjourn to Fenton's Creamery for dinner and ice cream. Fenton's was an East Bay institution. They ate dinner, talked, laughed, and then ate a lot of ice cream. Appetites fueled by marijuana supplied by James. They were all feeling great, and Lily watched James as he hovered. He had that look that told her he expected something more than the coldness she had shown him recently. She giggled as she remembered something her father used to say, when she wanted something she couldn't have. "Lily, you have 2 chances, slim and none." Although he usually smiled as he said it, her father would often ensure that she received that item for Christmas or her birthday. That wasn't going to happen with James. In fact, The group had agreed to exclude him in the future. Lily was sitting with her back to the door when Christine, who sat across from her, straightened up, her eyes growing wide. Holy shit, ladies. Whoever he is, I have first dibs. They all laughed, since Christine was not known for her discriminating taste in men. She would just hold her hands out about a foot apart and say, "Ladies, here is my measuring stick." Other than that, nothing matters. Susan, who sat next to Christine and attended high school with Lily, said, "Lily. Isn't that Andy Anderson?" Lily turned fast and gasped when she saw him. It was Andy or Andy. Damn. He's gorgeous. And you both know this guy? Christine practically drooled. Lily struggled to breathe as she watched him accompany the hostess to a table near the door. His blonde hair was close cropped, and he wore jeans and a close-fitting black t-shirt. He was quite lovely. Over 6 feet tall, with no fat on his body. She saw his well-defined arm and shoulder muscles as he moved. His arms were tanned, and his face appeared to have been exposed to the sun for an extended period of time. He was no longer a high school student. He was a guy, and he carried himself confidently. Hers wasn't the only female head in the room that turned to look at him, and Lily felt a twinge of jealousy as the hostess leaned over to help him settle into the booth. She appeared to make sure he took a long look down the front of her red silk blouse. She finally went away, tossing her blonde hair and allowing her hips to sway as much as possible, highlighting her exquisite legs below her very short skirt. Her really high heels contributed to the effect. What a 304. I assumed she was going to screw him right there at the table. Christine laughed and said, "I guess I better make my move soon." At that instant, she noticed Lily's expression as she turned around. "Oh, no. Cannot be. This is the guy's garbage. Not the person in your neighborhood. The lad next door. Damn, girl. I was ready to go over there and spread myself on the table. Damn, damn." The other two women gazed at Christine before moving on to Lily, unaware of Andy and Lily's story. James, as usual, looked bewildered. "Well, you should go over there and chat to him. Because the 304 hostess, or one of the other bitches in this place, will go over there in a few minutes. And there will be a catfight." Lily gazed at her pal. She wasn't sure what she'd say or how she'd approach him. She had missed him every day and had hoped to meet him again someday. But that scenario usually involved Andy arriving up at her house with a dozen roses and an engagement ring. Only a fantasy. Now he was here, and she was paralyzed. Christine broke the enchantment by sliding from the booth. She stood over Lily, holding out her hand. "Let's go." Lily stared at her pal, then turned to Andy. She felt like she was on fire, and her legs were made of lead. "Now I'm heading over there and dragging his gorgeous buttocks back to the table." Lily was in a fog. The effects of the marijuana had worn off, but she continued to feel sedated. She grabbed Christine's hand and pulled her out of the booth. Christine stood in front of her and quickly examined her. "No time for lipstick. You look fine. Just go." Christine turned and gave her a small push in the direction of Andy. He was looking at the menu when she approached. Her heart pounded. As she came closer, she noticed the other alterations. He was truly a man now. The gangly teenager she had known had vanished. She looked at his left hand and was relieved to find no ring. However, a nasty-looking scar extended the majority of the length of his forearm. "Hello, Andrew." He looked up at her, his gray eyes taking her in, and his demeanor bland. She was glad she had dressed a skirt, shirt, and heels that day. Her knees felt rubbery while she waited for a response. Did he still recognize her? "Hello, Lily." She stood there. As a wave of emotion swept over her, she was unable to express herself. She wanted to cry, embrace him, hug him, and never let him leave again. Her feelings for Andy felt greater than ever. She had convinced herself that she would never see him again. But here he was. There has to be a sign. He was back, and she determined never to let him leave again. "Would you like to sit?" He motioned to the seat across the table. She nodded and moved silently across the chilly plastic. "How are you, Lily?" His eyes were serene, as was his voice, but there was tension in his body that contradicted his seeming calm. "Say something. Say something." Her inner voice yelled at her, but she remained frozen. Perhaps this was like encountering the spirit of a long-deceased loved one. He watched her with a small smile on his face. Finally, she blurted, Andy, I am really glad to see you." "I'm glad to see you, Lily." She thought she was going to faint when he grinned at her. She could feel blood flow to her face, and her heart rate increased again. "He remembers me and expressed his pleasure at seeing me." She had a thought. Lily began to reach across the table, but stopped herself. She wanted to touch him, feel him, and know he was real. That's when he accomplished something extraordinary. He stretched across the table to take her hand. He held her hand with a warm, solid grip. She didn't want him to let go. "Lily, are you all right?" She could only nod as the tears flowed. For years, tears appeared to flow from her. She placed her other hand on his, and he folded his hands around hers. They sat for what seemed like a long time. Lily was indifferent to her surroundings. To her dismay, he withdrew one of his hands, but she had to smile as he extended his napkin. "I apologize. I apologize." All she could say was Andy. She hoped he'd realize that she wasn't apologizing for her behavior in public, but for her idiocy in abandoning him in high school, when she thought happiness was a cheerleader's uniform. "Lily." She gazed at him as her tears dried. "Lily, my name is now Michael. Nobody calls me Andy anymore." "Michael." She muttered it quietly, testing it out. It appeared strange, but fitting for this man who was no longer the boy she knew. She almost forgot. Michael was his first name. Andy Anderson has been her lifelong companion. She glanced at him for a few more seconds before smiling. Michael. The first like the name. She was startled from her warm glow as James leaned over her. Aggressively ignoring Michael, he murmured, "Lily, it's time to leave. We are leaving immediately." He stretched out and grabbed her arm. Michael's hand moved so quickly she barely noticed it. She had just seen the results. Michael grabbed James's wrist as James winced in pain. Michael never looked at James. "Lily, are you going with him?" She shook her head, maintaining a firm grip on James's wrist. He turned and looked at him. "Lily does not want to travel with you. Let go. It aches." "Let me go." James whined. Michael stared at him as if he were something terrible. He just stepped in and released his wrist. James gazed daggers at Michael, who was smiling. It was a terrifying smile, but fortunately for James, he did not force it. James stepped back from the table and rubbed his wrist, saying, "Well, Lily, I suppose I'll see you later." He did not wait for a response before fleeing toward the entrance. "Friend?" "No, it's just a person I work with. Seems possessive. We dated several times. He believes we have something. He's mistaken. Will he cause trouble?" Lily gazed at him. "No, I do not think so." Michael nodded. Christine and the other women left shortly afterwards. They did not stop for introductions. Lily had ridden with Christine, but she was confident that Michael would get her home safely. Lily grinned as Michael devoured a massive steak and one of Fenton's famous banana splits. She declined his offer to share. She was so thrilled and excited that she simply watched him. She appeared to be doing all of the talking, telling him about her parents and her 4 years at Berkeley. She realized she was rambling on, but she couldn't stop herself. She was scared that if she ran out of topics to discuss, he would end the conversation and drive her home. She never wanted to return home again. She only wanted to be with him, where her heart was. Yes, Michael. She considered a new name for the beginning of their new life. She urgently wanted them to be together. Lying on the nice bed in her new home, Lily stared at the ceiling. She recalled that her elation upon seeing Michael was fleeting. Things do not always turn out the way we want them to. Over dinner, Lily learned that Michael will only be in Berkeley for a few months, working as a computer engineering intern for Professor Jonathan Millard. In the fall, he'd travel 250 miles south, to San Luis Obispo, to start his studies at Cal Poly. She tried hard not to express her displeasure. Even terrible was the drive to her parents' house. Michael was extremely quiet, and there were times of silence. Finally, they arrived at her house in his new Jeep, listening to music from the local classic rock station. Michael had picked up the Jeep in Southern California the week before he departed the Marine Corps. It was black, immaculate, and smelt new. Michael finally turned to her. "Lily." She gazed at him, worried about what he would say next. He tried again. "Lily, I never imagined I could. It was a complete surprise to see you again. I suppose I understand how you feel about me." As tears welled up, she thought, "Here it comes. I'm overwhelmed. And right now, I have no idea what to think." Lily reached for her handbag for a tissue, to wipe away the tears that were streaming down her face. "Lily, you have hurt me so much that I have given up on us. I assumed we'd never see one other again, so I'm not sure what to do right now. Part of me wants to hug you. And a part of me wants to flee away. You are my best friend. And I assumed we'd always be together under the light of the street lamp, outside her parents' house." She observed him, noticing the pain in his eyes. She desperately wanted to hold him and let him hold her. She would have given anything to be able to undo the harm she had caused this man. She had expected to spend the rest of her life with this man. She had foolishly tossed it aside. For what? So she may become popular. The Pep Squad's temporary popularity was nothing compared to having someone to love and be loved in return. Finally, he asked, "Are your folks still in the book?" "Yes, Lily. I will call you." I'm not sure when, but I'll call you before I go for Cal Poly. I need time to think. You may have heard that I'm not particularly lucky with women. He tried to grin, but the sorrow was obvious. Michael opened the door and approached her side of the car. Michael is always the gentleman. Even if he hates me, he will accompany me to the door. She assumed there was no goodnight kiss, only a quick holding her hand in both of his. Good night, Lily. Then he was gone. She stepped in and saw her mother reading in the living room. She had no words of advice for her grieving daughter, but she held her while she cried herself to sleep. Luckily for Lily, the following day was Saturday. She didn't have to work, so she walked to the Berkeley YMCA and swam laps until she was worn out. That is where Christine found her. They walked to the local park across from the high school and sat on a seat, where Lily informed her buddy about the evening. So, what are you going to do now? I guess I will wait for him to call. Lily, you can't possibly accept it. You know perfectly well the human race would have gone out thousands of years ago if it hadn't been for pushy women who know exactly what they want. Guys are foolish. We need to make them understand what is best for them. And that includes us. Every year, billions of dollars are spent on cosmetics and clothing. So we can wait for a guy to call. Not a chance. What shall I do? You, Lily, are on the lookout for your boyfriend. It's time to get dressed, do your hair, and put on cosmetics. So, by mid-morning Monday, Lily was a woman on a mission. She walked across the late summer silent campus to the computer laboratories. She carried the leather diary, assuming that the third time trying to deliver it to Michael would be the charm. She planned to follow him down and, if necessary, bring him out for lunch or coffee. She was dressed in a fresh yellow sundress that hit just above her knees and highlighted her tanned legs and arms. It is just enough cleavage to keep it intriguing. She wore high-heel sandals with ankle straps. She was happy to see that she drew attention as she walked through campus. Lily was desperate to get Michael back. She paused to evaluate her appearance one last time as she stood near the steps leading to the enormous white marble Greek Revival edifice. She removed her compact from her straw bag and gazed at herself. She grinned at the determined look on her face. I snapped the compact closed and prepared to climb the span of white marble stairs. Her heart stopped beating, and she stood motionless, staring up at the building's entryway. Michael stood at the top of the stairs, chuckling. Maya Nielsen joined in the laughs, and she was clutching his arm from her location. They didn't notice her when they came down. Still laughing. Maya was even more gorgeous than when Lily last saw her. Tall, blonde. She still resembled a model. They were so into one another that Lily doubted they would have noticed her, even if she had been standing in front of them. She exited the university, leaving the newly gift-wrapped journal in one of the campus trash bins. She did not want to see it or Michael again. The tears flowed as she remembered 3 years ago, when she saw Michael carry Dr. Maya Nielsen Ryan in his arms as they danced at a charity event for the medical institution. They looked so joyful as they talked, and as the dance progressed, Maya appeared to shape herself around Michael. Lily was furious with jealousy, knowing that they would be working with virtually every day for the foreseeable future as his company designed and installed the medical center's new computer system. Mom, are you really going to wear that on your date tonight? Maya Nielsen Ryan, MD, sat at her vanity in a blue silk robe, smiling in the mirror at her 16-year-old daughter, Allison. First and foremost, this is not a date. It's only supper with a friend. Second, what is wrong with what I am going to wear? Allison nodded to the blouse and skirt on the bed. This is what you wear to work every day. The only thing missing is your laboratory coat. Allison entered her mother's wardrobe and began searching through the hanging clothes. Maya could hear hangers slipping along the closet rails. Allison called from the closet. So, is this work friend another researcher? Maya knew Allison was dying of curiosity because she rarely went out. It had been 2 years since Paul died. Maya had devoted herself to their daughter's career. Paul had been an excellent husband and father, and they both missed him tremendously. Allison explained that he now owns the computer business that is upgrading all of our systems from the closet. So, he's a computer nerd. Maya smiled as a picture of Michael Anderson appeared in her head. Michael was far from a geek. He was tall, beautiful, and softly spoken. But when he spoke, everyone listened. He had a commanding presence that few could ignore. She flushed as she remembered how Michael's muscular body felt against hers back in high school, when she was madly in love with him. He was a lovely, compassionate lover who had driven her wild. Maya was relieved her kid couldn't see her reaction. Allison was a perceptive child, and since Paul's death, Maya had sensed a resurgence of the love she and Michael had enjoyed in high school. She didn't stop missing her late husband. He was a clever, kind man who loved her wholeheartedly. It was just that I worked so closely with Michael, sometimes for days on end, and those were hard days. She fell in love with him again. Michael had been her first love, and their breakup left her distraught. For months, it appeared that she had an elephant sitting on her breast. She simply couldn't breathe. Even at a new school distant from him, she was unhappy. It had been her fault. That made matters worse. When she uncovered her sister's heinous plan to destroy Michael in high school, she was horrified all over again. Michael departed after finishing school, and no one seemed to know where he went. More than 4 years later, he stepped into her Berkeley lab. "Mother, are you with me? Did you listen to what I said?" Allison had emerged from her closet with a stunning little black dress and matching pumps. While she was lost in thought, Maya had not worn pumps in a long time, and the heels were ridiculously high. The dress was a basic black dress, sleeveless with spaghetti straps, and slightly shorter than she was used to. Not that she didn't have the legs to do it, she'd never worn it. Maya had purchased it for their wedding anniversary meal. But the following week, Paul was diagnosed with spinal cord cancer, throwing their lives into chaos. Had it truly been 4 years ago? Maya grinned and shook her head. "I do not think so. It's a lot. 2 to 1, Allison said. Sexy. She's holding it in front of herself. She was wondering whether she could borrow it for the junior prom. And don't even consider borrowing it." Maya laughed. Allison's face flushed as she realized how effortlessly her mother had read her. Allison said that they were changing strategies. "So, do you know anything about this guy?" "Well, he owns his own business. He is a talented son at Stanford. A daughter attending law school at Berkeley. And, well, he looks nice." "Oh, how attractive." Allison teased. "Very. Now, can we change the subject? Only if you can tell me how you met." She twisted around on the chair and faced her daughter, trying to think of what to say. She and Michael had been working together for nearly 3 years, and the computer upgrade project was nearing completion. That disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. Seeing Michael brightened her day, and she missed the fast brown bag lunches they frequently shared, sometimes in a conference room full of medical center personnel and Michael's employees. It did not matter. She felt better just being around him. During Paul's final year, as his sickness worsened, Mary found herself increasingly reliant on Michael as a friend. He was someone she could trust, and she never had to worry about what would end up in the medical center gossip chain. Michael had attended Paul's funeral and the memorial service at the cemetery. She recognized him among the crowds of mourners as he stood a few meters behind her. But they never had the opportunity to speak. She was deeply comforted by his presence, and as she turned away from the cemetery on that blustery and cool San Francisco day and saw him walk directly to his car, she finally gave in and realized she had formed strong feelings for him. Was she deluding herself? Were her feelings simply a reflection of the strong passion they shared years ago? Was this something new? Or was she simply confused and insecure, looking for comfort in a friend? Did he feel anything beyond friendship and sympathy? They worked together for a year, until Paul died. He had always been affectionate and loyal to his pal. Of fact, Michael was married, but Maya knew little about it. Michael was clearly happy of his son and daughter, but he rarely spoke about his wife. "Hello, Mother. You still with me?" "Oh, sorry. I have known Michael since high school." Allison stared at her and sensed something deeper. "He was my first boyfriend there." She had said that, but the words elicited so much sorrow. Her eyes welled up with tears, making it difficult to hold them back. She grabbed a tissue and dried her eyes, watching her daughter's demeanor shift from someone about to make a wise acid remark to a caring daughter. Allison placed the dress on the bed, then approached her mother and embraced her. "He must have harmed you severely." Maya was at a loss for words as the sobbing poured out. She couldn't understand where this piercing pain had come from. After more than 20 years, the recollection of Michael walking away from her in the park across from the high school on a rainy early January day was as vivid and terrible as the day it occurred. After a few moments, Maya gathered herself. Allison walked away from the bed and sat facing her. She was very protective of her mother, and she couldn't understand why she would consider seeing a man who had harmed her so horribly. Even if it happened years ago. Maya dried her nose and glanced at Allison, feeling the need for an explanation, saying, "He was the love of my life, my first love. He was a senior, although I was a junior. We met at the Berkeley pool over the summer. He was a lifeguard." She grinned slightly at the remembrance of their first meeting. Meeting the bashful lifeguard with deep gray eyes and a gorgeous figure. "So he took advantage of you, then broke your heart, correct?" Allison inquired. Her tone conveyed to Maya just what she thought of him. Maya fought hard to keep more tears from falling. "I know he loved me with all his heart, but I did something dumb and injured him so badly that he couldn't stand the sight of me." Maya hung her head, and tears flowed anew. Allison was puzzled. This woman, her mother, represented the pinnacle of the professional woman. A woman who completed college in 3 years at the top of her class. was accepted to medical school at 21, married her mentor Paul Ryan, a great research scientist, and spent her years uncovering the mysteries of terrible diseases. How did this superwoman make a mistake that brought her such grief many years later? I am sorry, Allison. I'm not sure what came over me. The memories of when we broke up washed over me. She smiled slightly and continued. I thought I had forgotten about that. I am being silly. She rose and joined her daughter, who was still seated on the bed. She clasped her hands in hers and murmured, sometimes memories that have been stored away decide to surface at unexpected times. Allison embraced her. Maya realized she had lied to her daughter. Being near Michael, especially after Paul died, reminded her of her foolishness on a daily basis. No matter how much she tried to justify it, as the misjudgment of a hormonal teen who had too many drinks. It was still there, even in the darkness. Finally, Maya responded, I guess I should get back to getting ready. Allison rose and took up the black dress. This is definite. You're going to show this guy that he shouldn't have left you all those years ago. She smiled at her mother and nodded her head. Maya gazed at her before focusing on the clothing. You're correct. Tonight, it will be. Eat your heart out, Michael Anderson. Allison sneered at her and returned the dress on the bed. The mood had lightened. He's coming here. Maya nodded. So I'm interested in meeting this person, especially if he's attractive. Now, are we talking about hot excellent looks or simply not terrible for an old guy? Maya made a face at her daughter. Get out of here and let me to finish getting ready. On second consideration, Mom, maybe you should stick with the skirt and blouse. Allison laughed. Go. Yes, Mother, she replied in her most false voice. She smiled as she went, saying, I'll listen for the door. As Maya got into the shower, she reminded herself that she had asked Michael out, which had led to this date. She'd seen him cocoon himself after the divorce, and felt it was time for him to go on with his life. And she was determined to be the woman who helped him do so. She knew she wanted to see him outside of work, so she could explore her feelings for him, which had grown since Paul's death. Actually, she was aware of her feelings. She just didn't know how Michael saw their connection. She sought more than friendship. Maya wished Michael had felt close enough to her to open up about what had transpired in his marriage. She knew some of the circumstances, and the divorce was caused by his wife's betrayal. She recalled the first time she heard of an issue with Michael's wife. What was her name? Oh yes, Lily. He arrived at the medical institution for a meeting about a year ago, and looked terrible. She pulled him aside during the break. Michael, are you all right? She grinned at him and added, I'm your friend, and I can tell you that you look terrible. Are you feeling all right? I apologize. Maya. Just some family health issues kept me fairly busy over the weekend. Is everyone okay? She spoke with real concern. He gazed at her. The melancholy in his eyes made her want to cry. My wife has been hospitalized. Michael, why are you here? You should take your belongings and leave. This meeting can run by itself. When she returned to the conference room, she noticed that all of the IT personnel were concentrating on Michael's texts. I didn't care if Michael was there or not. She was unconscious, and I couldn't just sit there and go crazy. Anyway, my kid is with her right now. I'll check back tonight. Maya took hold of his arm and guided him to her office. She sat beside him on the couch. Can you discuss it? He breathed deeply. Lily attempted to commit suicide. Maya was stunned and had to fight an inclination to ask for all of the medical information before saying, Oh dear, I'm so sorry. Is she going to be okay? She's out of danger. Maya didn't press for more, but after about a minute, he replied, I got home from Taipei on Sunday morning and found her. Maya wrapped her arms around Michael, holding him for several minutes. Michael never supplied any additional information other than an update on Lily's condition when she inquired. Shortly after she was released from the hospital, he reported that he had moved out of their house and was divorcing her. Maya was perplexed, since she couldn't believe Michael would abandon his wife of over 20 years under those conditions. She questioned whether she had misread his character. No. Following Lily's illness, she concluded that she must have done something terrible to Michael to precipitate the divorce. She pieced together the story on her own after learning that Madison and Oscar, a law firm, was downsizing and moving to Oakland. She contacted a female acquaintance who was one of the attorneys. Michael's wife, Maya knew, had worked there. Maya. Several months ago, things became really bad around here. I am moving on. This area is toxic. One of our paralegals attempted to commit suicide. One of our senior guys had given her some coke. The DEA received an anonymous tip and tore this facility apart. They discovered a significant amount of narcotics in his desk, of all places. They believe someone may have tipped him off, because his computer was entirely cleaned. Even the best DEA agents couldn't recover anything. I wondered if he had time to clean his computer. Why didn't he flush the narcotics? Puzzling. Did you know Lily Anderson? Maya. Why the questions? She paused for a bit. I am a buddy of Lily's hubby. Oh, you cannot just ask him. No. She stopped briefly before saying, look, Maya, I just heard that some of the senior guys were trading coke for sex with some of the assistants, including Lily Anderson. That is all I know. Except for a few lawsuits, firings, and a large exodus of attorneys from the firm. Thanks. I owe you. Her pal laughed. You cannot afford me. Please send me some business. I'll be over at Lloyd & Johnson. So Maya figured out what had torn Michael's marriage apart. It saddened her. What led Lily to become involved? Trading sex for drugs. She was aware that they had 2 children and appeared to be in financial difficulties. Worries. Was Michael the ogre who made Lily's life so miserable? She went to opioids and committed suicide. Maya simply couldn't conceive such a thing. Of course. Maya knew Lily from high school? Not well, of course. Because Lily and Maya's older sister Melinda were on the same pep squad. There was some interaction. She had not seen Lily since high school, possibly 3 years ago. Not long after, Michael was awarded a large contract to upgrade the medical center's computers. It occurred at a charity gala for the medical institution, which also honored Paul. He'd rallied enough to attend in a wheelchair. The cancer was rapidly spreading, and it was truly only a matter of time. They happened to be seated at an 8-person table with Michael and Lily. Even though they hadn't seen each other in years, the 2 women knew each other immediately. The throng was too large, and the activities were too loud to allow for much discourse. Maya observed the 2 of them, and noticed a distance that appeared to eclipse their relationship. Lily was incredibly lovely, and probably weighed little more than she did in high school. Maya also noted that Lily was drinking a lot of wine. That evening, Paul was honored and delivered a beautiful little speech full of self-deprecating humor. As usual, thanking his team by name. There were numerous handkerchiefs there, by the time he concluded, and expressed his profound gratitude to Maya. His pleas for extra research cash resulted in a record fundraising evening. As things came to a close, only Michael and Lily remained at the table. Michael had been attempting to get Lily to dance with him, but she seemed out of sync. Finally, Paul called across the table. Mr. Anderson, could you please do me a tremendous favor? Michael grinned as he looked across at Paul. Please call me Michael, and I will do whatever I can for Dr. Ryan. I would feel honored. Paul smiled. Maya enjoys dancing, and I am currently confined to a chair. So, could you dance with her once as my proxy? Michael stepped up and replied, I'd be delighted. Lily glared at Michael, and reached for the remaining bottle of wine in the center of the table. Maya remembers the dance, as if it were yesterday. She wondered what was wrong with Lily, that she refused to dance with Michael when he grabbed her in his arms. She forgot about Lily and the wine she had consumed. She let go and melted into him, as he took her around the dance floor, in the dimly lit ballroom. Michael was a fantastic dancer, and whoever trained him did an excellent job. His lead was almost telepathic, directing her with a gentle touch on her back or arm, or a slight twist of his leg. She had never danced like this before. It was delightfully sexy. They had only been working together for a short time, but this was her first time in his arms since they were teenagers. And the dance ended far too soon. She and Paul said their goodbyes, and she noticed Lily's hard expression when they returned to the table. Maya was abruptly reminded of that night, and she began to reflect on it more closely. Had that dance led Lily down the narcotic-infused path she chose? There was some conflict between the 2. But did Lily's jealousy and insecurity about Michael's daily labor with Maya set the self-destructive course? Lily and Maya had been competitors many years ago, but fortune had favored Lily, and she ended up with Michael. Why should she feel threatened? Maya attempted to remove the memories, but was unsuccessful. They flooded back. She was suddenly 16 again, and she had fallen in love for the first time. Before her junior year, she had a great summer in Northern California. Those days with Michael were fantastic. He had finally come out of his shell with her, explaining grudgingly that his former girlfriend, Lily, had deserted him the year before. At the moment, Maya had no idea what was wrong with that girl. Aside from Michael's pain, she was relieved because it opened up a new opportunity. She had a vague idea who the girl was. And then, near the end of the summer, right before school began, Maya noticed Lily in the Berkeley pool, where Michael was the lifeguard. Maya took immense delight in approaching Michael and slipping her arm through his. Lily appeared shocked. It was actually humorous since Lily appeared to want to be possessive, but Michael cut her off. It was not anything he said. His chilly demeanor indicated that he had lost interest in her. She had dumped him for the glamorous life of a cheerleader, only to realize that he would not wait for her. Maya had never told Michael how pleased she was to see his ex-girlfriend put in her place. As she washed in preparation for her meeting with Michael, Maya had to concede that her victory that day was a hollow one. For who ended up marrying Michael? Lily, the ex-girlfriend, won out. Fate had played a nasty game with Michael and Maya, and their relationship ended because of her foolishness. She had harmed the guy she loved, and it took a long time to recover. Get past it. Actually, even after Paul's death, she looked back and pondered what if Michael returned from his 4-year stint in the Marines this summer. Maya, 21, was undertaking a research internship with her idol, Dr. Paul Ryan. She was a recent college graduate about to begin medical school in the autumn, when she was offered one of Paul's summer internships. He was personable and determined, and although being nearly 10 years her senior, his marriage proposal took her by surprise. Maya wondered whether Michael had shown up just a few weeks before. Would she have ended up with him? Regardless, when he did return, he landed up in her lab by accident on the first day. She was astonished when she saw him. She was alone in the lab, and she remembered carefully placing the liquid filled on the lab bench before running to him and wrapping her arms around him. They embraced each other like long-lost buddies. Their tumultuous past is behind them. They had both developed significantly over his few weeks on university. They ate several lunches together. Paul was always too busy to get away for lunch, so it was a welcome distraction for her. And she learned very little about where he had been during the last 4 years. They mostly talked about the future, but it was a future without the other. Michael was thrilled to begin his engineering studies at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, where he hoped to develop and create the next generation of computers. Maya was delighted to start medical school. Her engagement to Paul was less dramatic. At the time, it appeared to be a business transaction or a meeting of the minds. Although their love had grown over the years, the arrival of Allison seemed to bring them closer together. Paul had been a terrific man, a wonderful husband and father, and his death was a devastating blow. Nonetheless, she had made it obvious to Michael from the beginning that she was engaged and that they had no future together. If Michael was hurt, she thought he did it nicely. But given how she had harmed him in the past, this was not surprising. So they had a few weeks till he had to depart for school. They vowed friendship and to write. But due to the responsibilities of medical school and his college, letters were few. She last heard from him a week before her wedding, when he sent her a card with a word of congratulations. That saddened her tremendously. But it was too late to turn back the clock. Not long after, she received word from a friend. Michael had married Lily, Maya's ex-girlfriend whom she had seen in the Berkeley pool in the late summer of their high school years. She'd pondered what had brought them back together. Of course, everything would have been different if she had not driven Michael away with her one silly act of juvenile defiance and idiocy in the Whistler ski resort near Vancouver, Canada, during Christmas vacation. She and Michael had been exclusive for about 6 months, and had their first intercourse that day. In October, she turned 17. Her parents loved Michael for the most part, but at 17 they thought she was far too young to be tied down. However, Maya believed she had met the man with whom she would spend the rest of her life, and no amount of talk with her parents could persuade her otherwise. She had persuaded them that Michael should be included on their yearly ski trip, and she was overjoyed when they finally agreed. That year, they were visiting the Whistler Resort near Vancouver, Canada. Maya was ecstatic, and her youthful mind had naturally set a high bar. She envisaged skiing every day in beautiful powder, and spending the nights wrapped in Michael's arms. Their holiday began on Christmas Day, with an afternoon flight to Vancouver. When they picked up Michael, the first portion of her dream went wrong. He packed his snowboard, not skis. And, while he emphasized that they could rent skis together, he was also anxious to teach her how to snowboard. That was not how the 17-year-old Maya remembered their time together. Maya was also acting strangely throughout the flight, which puzzled Michael. Of course, the fact that her menstruation had started a few days before didn't help matters. Those small road bumps were quickly followed by a blizzard, which effectively halted all outdoor activity. On top of that, her parents had arranged for a 2-bedroom suite, so she shared the suite with them as well as a room with her sister, Melinda. Michael's room was at the opposite end of the lodge. There was no way she could spend nights with Michael. Her mood was less than cheery throughout the weather-induced solitude. She did get to spend some peaceful time with Michael. They spent time beside the massive fireplace in the Great Hall, reading and sitting close together, feeling each other's warmth. They ate all their meals together. She was frustrated by the lack of closeness forced by the sleeping arrangements, as well as the fact that a parent or sibling was always present. 2 days after Christmas, the weather became clear and frigid. The conditions on the mountain were once again ideal. She and Michael hit the slopes early and skied till lunchtime. At lunch, she was astonished when a bunch of snowboarders approached the table and began conversing with Michael about snowboarding that afternoon. They left, expressing their wish to see him later. What was upsetting was a young woman, whom Maya described as full of golf, who was obviously quite taken with Michael. "Have you promised to go snowboarding with them this afternoon?" She said something snippy. "Ashley." He appeared bashful. "Well, we did discuss it yesterday. I was going to mention it, and I thought now would be a good time for you to give it a try." "And when were you going to mention it to me?" Michael gazed at her. "I apologize. We can ski this afternoon and snowboard on another day." Unfortunately, Maya was not to be persuaded, and she made the first of several errors in judgment that would cost her Michael's love when she said it doesn't really matter. "I'm kind of tired." "You go ahead." "Are you sure?" She wanted to shout at him for being so clueless that she felt sad and disappointed. Instead, she simply shrugged and said it was all right. Seething, she watched him go to his room to fetch his snowboard. This journey continues becoming better. By the time she returned to her empty room, she had convinced herself that Michael did not love her and was just skiing because he wanted to be with that goth girl. She paced the room, seething. Finally, she lay down on her bed and gradually fell asleep. Her mother woke her and asked if she wanted to join them for dinner. She said she had a headache and will pass. Where was Michael? It was dark, and snow was falling heavily. She fumed, most likely at his new companion, the goth. She looked in the minibar, bored and upset, hoping to find some chocolate to cheer her up. As she pulled out a Cadbury, she noticed the Bailey's Irish Cream among the miniatures. That was kind of chocolate flavored. What could it hurt? It was only a small bottle. She didn't use a glass and drained the bottle in a few gulps. It cautioned her insides as she consumed the Cadbury. She switched on the television and did some channel surfing. By 6 o'clock, Michael had yet to appear, and Drambuie was up next. It was both delicious and potent. Maya had minimal experience with alcohol, having only consumed a sip of beer and an odd glass of wine at home on exceptional occasions. The next item on the list was a half bottle of red wine. At that point, she considered the hot tub. She and Michael had ended up there the previous 2 evenings. Maya wondered if Michael was there with his snowboarding mates. She would go investigate and possibly catch him in the act. She changed into her smallest two-piece, put on a hotel robe, and grabbed a half bottle of white wine before leaving her room. She laughed as she strolled the halls, amused by her unsteadiness. She soon arrived in the hot tub, which was near a large indoor pool in an atrium with glass walls and ceilings. The snow made it really attractive. Instead of Michael and his snowboarding buddies, she discovered a mixed group of elder Canadian children. They called her and persuaded her to join the others in the enormous tiled hot tub. She ended up choosing between a muscular boy and a huge-chested, red-haired chick. They had all been drinking, and when Maya sat, the two of them pressed up against her. She was under the influence of the booze and watched the snow fall outside in the dim light. Maya relaxed, and soon she felt hands massaging her legs. She was too inebriated to object, and it felt great. Soon, a hand was caressing her body, and she realized her top was undone, leaving her body exposed. She opened her eyes to find herself alone save for her two companions. She stared at them, and about to say no, but was stopped by a kiss. Maya was dreaming when a hand took hers and placed it on the boy's tool next to her. That's when she heard the horrible words. "Jesus, Maya, what are you doing?" Michael stood over her, his expression filled with fury and pain. He reached down and grabbed her arm as she attempted to protect herself. She barely protested as he drew her up. Maya was stunned when the Canadian boy threw a strong roundhouse punch to the side of Michael's face. Michael stumbled backward, his head hitting the tile wall with a loud bang. Dazed, he fell to his knees on the tile floor. Maya shouted, "Oh, no." She attempted to approach him, but she was having difficulty pulling her suit up and finding her top. She watched Michael shake his head, and she'll never forget the sight in his eyes or the blood that spattered the tiles from the wound above his eye. He muttered nothing as he forced himself up and unsteadily turned to leave. "Michael? Michael!" she yelled, but he wasn't hearing her. With shaking hands, she pulled up the bottom of her suit and grabbed the top from the floor near the hot tub, without bothering to put it back on. She didn't believe she was capable of tying it anyway. She slipped into the hotel robe and walked away without looking back. I felt ashamed and scared. She then chose the cowardly way out. Instead of going to Michael and helping him and telling him how sorry she was, she ran to her room, justifying her actions with the hope that things would improve in the morning. But by then, it was far too late. She seldom slept. What might she say to him? How could she get him to understand? The next morning, she arrived at Michael's room, but only the maid was present, and Michael and his possessions were nowhere to be seen. Maya, Panicked, inquired at the counter. The clerk on duty looked over his files and stated that Mr. Anderson checked out shortly before midnight. Where might he have gone? The snowstorm had raged overnight, and none of the night staff could recall if a taxi had been summoned or what had happened to the tall, young American with a bandage over his eye. In her confused and panicked state, it wasn't until lunchtime that she told her parents that she and Michael had fought and that he had left the motel the night before. Her parents immediately called the Andersons to see whether he had contacted them. He hadn't, and by dark, everyone was quite concerned. In the days before cell phones, it was possible to just disappear from sight and communication. Maya assumed Michael was dead in a snowbank, so they were all relieved when one of the hotel workers stated they had spoken with a snowplow driver who had picked him up near the hotel and driven him down the mountain. Unfortunately, the driver knew nothing else except that he had let Michael off at the main highway at 3 in the morning. The family left the next morning, still without hearing from or about Michael. They made a report to a very solicitous RCMP officer. Maya hadn't stopped crying since the morning she discovered Michael had left. Her waking hours and restless sleep were plagued with visions of Michael's bloodied face as he recognized her betrayal. 4 days later, the California Highway Patrol delivered Michael to his parents' home. He was taken up at a rest area on Interstate 5 in Northern California, near Red Bluff. He hitchhiked from Canada, selling his snowboard along the route to buy food. Michael's mother intervened on Maya's behalf, and he consented to meet her. So, 2 days into the new year, she was sitting on a seat in the tiny park across from the high school. Miserable, in the drizzle. She hadn't slept or eaten in days, and she was so overwhelmed by guilt that she didn't know how much longer she could bear the suffering inside. When he came, there was no welcoming smile or hug. His eyes were most likely reflecting her own agony. She cringed when she noticed the enormous purple bruise on his cheek and the row of sutures over his right eye. The bruise that grew there reached close to his hairline. She indicated for him to sit beside her, but he just shook his head. Standing in front of her in an old parka and pants, rain dripping from his damp hair. Michael. The first apologize. Sorry. She sobbed. He said nothing but gave a small shrug. I know I'll never be able to take it all back or pretend it never happened, but I do need to tell you that I was intoxicated. His expression did not change. I was dumb and jealous. Jealous of the goth chick. And I was angry. So I began drinking. I wanted to check the hot tub to see whether you were present. I should have left, but I went into the bathtub. Maya lowered her head and sobbed, tears mixing with the rain on her face. After a while, she looked up. The pain in his eyes expressed how she had harmed him. I apologize. I am terribly sorry. Will you ever forgive me? Before he could respond, she said, I just want us back together for a second. He seemed astounded by what she said. He smiled, but it was full of sadness. It crushed her heart. At that point, she realized she had lost him. It seemed like an icy fist had wrapped around her heart. Finally, Michael spoke. I'm sorry, too, Maya. I assumed we had something special. I was mistaken. She flinched, as if struck, when he said those words. We need some time apart, for each of us to process what happened and move on with our lives. I loved you with all of my heart, and I probably will always be inside. But I am tired of loving and being hurt. I don't think I'll ever take that chance again. She couldn't say anything. Her throat was severely constricted. Goodbye, Maya. I hope you find love and happiness. He turned to walk away, and she finally found her voice. Michael, the first will adore you forever. She called out. He paused and turned. Love never lasts. Those were the last words she heard from Michael before he returned from the Marines almost 4.5 years later. Maya shook herself. The memories were immediately sharp. Working with Michael for the past 3 years forced her to confront those memories. But Paul was dying, and Michael was there to support her. Her marital support. Then Lily betrayed him. Now they were going on a date. Maya initiated a date. He had been deeply damaged by the 2 ladies he adored the most. Why should he want to rebuild his friendship with her? Michael was gorgeous, bright, and a pleasant individual. Certainly, any number of women having no history with Michael, would be thrilled to spend their lives making him happy. She had seen the faces of the women in the hospital center as they crowded around. Maya finished her preparations and felt insecure as she looked at herself in the oval mirror. Even in her stunning black dress and heels, she only saw a wife, mother, and scientist, not a gorgeous blonde woman. What could she offer him? Her emotions had escalated to the point where she had made herself vulnerable. What if he merely wanted to remain friends? Maya said it wasn't what she wanted. She wanted to spend the rest of her life with him and have him love her. The same thing that 17-year-old Maya had desired. Maya also felt Michael would be an excellent dad to Allison, treating her as if she were his own child. She felt out of her depth. She couldn't answer this problem using a scientific formula. There was no textbook explanation for how love works, but the wheel of fate had spun, and she recognized this was her chance to win Michael. She finished her makeup, grabbed her purse, and dashed into the living room, determined to show Michael how much she loved him, that she was worthy of his affection, and that love endures. She just heard the door chime. Her heart flutters. Meanwhile, Michael and I sat and watched the tops of the clouds turn orange and pink as the sun rose behind a Gulfstream G650 corporate jet. As we cruised above 50,000 feet, I glanced away from the window and smiled at the sleeping shape in the large horizontal sleeper seat beside me. She was so covered in blankets that I could only see her figure. I didn't have to see her to know. She was gorgeous and loved me. I was a lucky man. The new Gulfstream belonged to Mr. T.J. Tan, a rich and longtime client. My sleeping partner and I were the sole passengers on the flight to Singapore, where TJ would meet us and show us the new $47 million addition to his jet fleet. When TJ found out I was on my way, he graciously offered us a ride on the delivery flight. The gorgeous blue and white airplane had traveled from Savannah, Georgia to San Francisco to meet us. It could fly nonstop from California to Singapore, was equipped with every luxurious amenity, and had a 4-person delivery team. This was half business vacation, but primarily a honeymoon. It was also a new start. The two of us are from Singapore. We'd spend a month in Australia and New Zealand before traveling back across the Pacific via Fiji, Tahiti, and Hawaii. I just wanted to make her as happy as she pleased me. It had been about 2 years since the dreadful day I returned from my trip to Taipei to discover my wife was an alcoholic on the verge of cocaine addiction. If not worse, her mental state had deteriorated to the point where she was contemplating suicide due to her alcoholism and mental health issues. And this is what led her to fall victim to an unscrupulous partner at her law business. During those days, my and Lily's lives had been flipped upside down, and I was on an emotional roller coaster. I despised and adored Lily. I also felt guilty for not doing more to get her into treatment. She had resisted my attempts to discuss it. And, of course, as our marriage deteriorated, the antagonism and lack of genuine affection took their toll. I consider myself to be a smart guy. But when you're in a bad relationship, it eats away at your soul, and you soon find yourself trying not to care, or simply deluding yourself that the other person would one day miraculously return to the kind, caring person you married. That was not to be for Lily. I felt something was wrong, but I had no idea she was clinically depressed, or that she was seeking consolation in booze, pills, and dangerous sexual conduct. Furthermore, I later realized that Lily had grown extremely jealous of my collaboration with Maya Nielsen Ryan. She had never forgotten that I had fallen in love with Maya many years ago, and she with me. Lily had convinced herself that we were having an affair due to her weakened state of mind. Fortunately, Lily made a quick physical recovery. Her mental state took longer, making it harder for me to assist her. Of course, I ensured she had the best medical care possible and paid for her stay at the Redwood. But emotionally, I was unable or unwilling to gather the confidence to do everything her therapist suggested. I couldn't tolerate being in the same room with her for long periods of time. If I hadn't watched her self-destructive collapse that Sunday morning, my wife would have dressed like a hooker, answered the phone from her coworkers, and saw the narcotics. I might have been able to accompany her as she desired during those months of therapy. But those memories were burnt into my mind, and the pain I had felt while she was tearing our marriage apart meant that I couldn't face her for a long time. Her betrayal was undoubtedly the rejection I had unconsciously feared all these years, ever since she cast me over for what I thought was a trivial pursuit back in high school. During Lily's disruptive conduct, I developed a hard personality. Alternatively, I could say, revert to being a hard man. My marriage to Lily and raising our children had mellowed me and taken the edge off. But the hardness I had developed in the Marines remained beneath the surface. I had learned to kill and had become an expert at it from both long and short range. As I left the Corps, a shrink informed me that my problem was not that I enjoyed killing and had no regret, but that I had no feelings at all. The old Marine Corps proverb goes, "The only thing I feel when I kill is recoil." This pretty much sums it up. It was my job, and I did it well. So I planned to assassinate Alexander Modine and beat Hal Jones. How was I so lucky? The only reason he was spared was because he had a family. That rainy Sunday, while Lily was unconscious, I had easy access to the law firm's downtown San Francisco headquarters. Stephen's electronic gadgets enabled me to move about undetected and undisturbed. I discovered an illegal drugs pharmacy in Alexander's office, as well as images on his computer that were used to blackmail Lily and other firm members, particularly a number of young female employees. He was truly a piece of work, and the world was a better place without his slimy presence. His computer also showed me how corruption had infiltrated the firm's highest echelons. I downloaded all of his stuff, and then wiped out his computer with a doomsday virus. A less virulent but persistent infection brought down the corporate network, but not before I had access to it. The legal firm's lack of computer connection for a few weeks had a significant impact on its bottom line. It helps to have friends in both high and low places. My anonymous information was promptly confirmed by Lily and several of the juvenile victims, and search warrants were served. The discovery of a substantial amount of coke in Alexander's office opened the door to a can of worms involving his ties with East Bay narcotics gangs, and he, as well as the law firm, were left hanging. Of course, the quantities of recreational narcotics discovered at the firm during the searches implicated many people, and there were plenty of employees prepared to testify. I knew that if all of the facts about narcotic usage and selling coke for sex became public, as well as the coercive tactics employed on some of the younger female employees, the firm would not survive, at least in its current prestigious form. Of course, I was a suspect. Perhaps not the top suspect, but a suspect nevertheless. When Alexander vanished, there were many individuals hunting for him, furious over his testimony before a grand jury and concerned about what else he may reveal. Many wicked individuals wanted him to disappear. I wanted to undertake the task by myself, but Steve persuaded me out of it. And when Alexander disappeared, I was on a flight to Seoul. There were no details supplied, but I imagined that fragments of his body had become part of the foundation of the new Transbay terminal. Actually, he was probably dropped in the Pacific. There are many miles offshore. Yes, the world was better off without him. Cameron, the irritating FBI special agent, seemed to have determined that I was the major suspect. Despite the fact that I had an excellent alibi, he showed up to my door the first time we met, simply to talk. I informed him that even though I barely knew Modine, if he was killed and buried, I would not mourn his or any other member of the firm's death. I wish them all a speedy journey to hell. My second interview was at the FBI office, and this time I brought my attorney. Cameron had subpoenaed all of my financial records, most likely in search of a hitman payout, or simply dirt. I also understood those documents would be sent to the IRS, and that I could expect years of audits. I felt it a little price to pay for vengeance, but I nevertheless recruited Helen Connors, Lily's new supervisor. Helen was a very gorgeous 40-something defense attorney who informed the FBI that I had already supplied a statement and all of my papers. And unless they were going to charge me for stopping the harassment, I liked her. I also appreciate that she never asked about my relationship with her employee, Lily. I knew Helen's ex, Michael Connors. He was a client. I obtained the deal after his PI firm upgraded all of their systems, including their maintenance contract. It wasn't a big job, but I considered it significant. I had no idea why they had broken up, but I did know Michael's business partner was his new wife. And she was a knockout. And he had begun a new family with her. Our children brought Lily and I back together, in the months after the divorce was finalized. Of course, we needed to get together for the big events, like Olivia's college graduation. Then there were supper out nights, when Ethan returned home from school. Most of the time, he would stay with me at my San Francisco condo, and because Lily worked only a few blocks away, it made sense to ask her along for dinner. Olivia made a point of driving the Bard from Berkeley during good weather. The four of us would sit outside at one of the eateries along the Brannan or in the Ferry Building. After supper, we'd go on a walk down Brandon, and I'd carry Lily and Olivia. We seemed like a happy family. These dinners became a weekly tradition, and I found myself looking forward to them. Ethan had gradually warmed up to his mother over the months. Of course, he was unaware of the sex and narcotics. He simply accepted the mental condition. And their relationship restored itself over the course of a year or two. At first, he was wary of his mother, fearing she would revert to the Harridan he had seen in high school. However, things quickly returned to normal. Of course, with him in college, his attention was diverted elsewhere. I know he was perplexed as to why I made such little effort to bring us back together. I believe he expected it to take longer because of the pain I had endured, but that I would finally accept our daughter, Olivia. I never knew what Lily told her about our breakup. While attending law school, she continued to live in the El Cerrito house with her mother. When she and I got together, she would just ask me how I was doing and not bring up the idea of getting back together with Lily. I believe she knew the truth, but it was clear that she wanted it to happen. During those days, it appeared like I would be outvoted, and Lily and I would eventually reconcile. The memories of that dreadful Sunday were beginning to fade, and Lily made it clear that if we got back together, the relationship would change, and she would never forget what our relationship was about. Olivia and I had split a bottle of wine when we were at an outdoor cafe on a beautiful evening. Ethan had joined in, sipping from his sister's glass, and they were feeling very relaxed with the evening sun on the bay and a gentle wind. Lily, of course, was not drinking, but she appeared comfortable and cheerful when Olivia inquired, "Dad, Mom once said that you two split up in high school and then reconciled after starting college. But she didn't explain how you got back together." Olivia looked uncomfortable, as if she had crossed a line. Lily looked sad for a moment, and before I could respond, she added, "We did not break up. I broke up with your father because I believed cheerleading was more important. When I realized my mistake, he had moved on and disappeared into the Marine Corps for 4 years." Her words caught Ethan's attention. He, like Olivia, had only heard the sanitized version. He blurted out that the two of us had grown up together, fallen in love, and married while I was in college. "So, what happened?" Lily smiled, but there was pain in her eyes as she stated, "Oh, I was a determined woman. And when I learned that your father would be starting at Cal Poly the autumn after I graduated, while I was applying for a job at Poly and ended up working in the admissions office, I grinned and continued the narrative. I recall when I first saw your mother at Poly. It was a beautiful late summer day, and I stood in long lines for class assignments, student identification, and other necessities. I feel incredibly elderly for being a freshman at almost 23. I'm sure all of that is done online now. There's definitely a Cal Poly app that just lets you register on your phone." I laughed. Of course, my experience in the Marine Corps did not improve my social skills, or lack thereof. Plus, after the Marines, I despised waiting in lines. Everyone laughed. I've heard my story about the drill instructor telling a recently graduated private that he knows the private despises him, and that the private will most likely come to piss on his grave one day. The private responded, "One thing I learned in 12 weeks in the Marines is that I dislike standing in lines." So I kept to myself, and saw the great show of immaturity all around me. Oh, it wasn't too horrible. Even nerds can have fun on occasion. Lily joined in. Everyone laughed, knowing Cal Poly's reputation as a school for smart youngsters. As I previously stated, instead of participating in the general frivolity of the day, I simply watched, reflecting on how old I felt and wondering how I would fit in. I was astonished to find your mother sitting at the registration table, after waiting in an interminable line. She was assisting me, and as I was completing some crucial aspects of my registration that day, she asked me out. And the rest is history. Actually, I believe it was your parking permit. Lily responded with a straight face. "See? I told you it was crucial." I winked to Olivia and Ethan, who chuckled along. This kind of good-natured banter pretty much summarized our evenings, but Lily and I never went out alone. We simply went into family mode when the kids were present. Ethan and Olivia left us alone after dinner, so I took Lily to the BART. I knew she wanted me to ask her out, but she was too hesitant. We had come a long way since our days at Cal Poly, yet I was torn. I had been in love with 2 ladies in the previous 3 years, and I had worked with Mia Nielsen Ryan during that time. And while we supported each other through difficult times, we grew closer. As my marriage deteriorated, even before Lily attempted suicide, I found myself pulled to Mia. Lily's fears that working with Mia will revive an old love came true. However, it was Lily who brought the match and kindling for the fire. Of course, I was scared to say anything to Mia for fear of jeopardizing the friendship I treasured so much. As the project at the medical center came to a conclusion, the prospect of not seeing Mia practically every day was painful. I was in a rut as a single person. I worked, and then returned to my unit. I saw Lily, Olivia, and Ethan virtually every week, and I found myself enjoying those times more and more as memories faded and habits developed over 20 years resurfaced. Was that sufficient? Most days, I felt split apart. I wanted my family back together and missed my beautiful wife from those years. But I had also been profoundly injured and was drawn to Mia, who had been through her own tragedies. Mia's welcoming smile and natural Scandinavian beauty, as well as her quick wit and intelligence, remained very much apparent. Yes, she had injured me. But the episode was so long ago that it was best forgotten. Looking back, I see 2 well-matched yet immature teenagers. We had not communicated adequately in each, and had conflicting expectations for our vacation to Canada. The result was a disaster. She got drunk and was taken advantage of. But 2 older teenagers. I had overreacted, and what should have been a spat evolved into a breakup foolishness, with my pride taking precedence. And I lost her during my time in the Marines. As I learned the patience of the sniper, I had plenty of time to ponder on those times with Mia. And as I grew older, the rage I felt was replaced with anger at myself. I considered writing to her several times while I was away, but I was convinced I had hurt her so deeply that she had forgotten me, or would never want to see me again. When I returned from the Marines, and unexpectedly met her in Berkeley, She hugged and cried. Unfortunately, it was too late. The last few weeks of that summer, when the warm light of Northern California made everything appear dreamlike, those were the days I remember spending with Maya. I couldn't tell her I still loved her. We enjoyed a lunch on campus and caught up in the shade of the trees on the lawns. She had no idea what I did in the Marines, since I only talked about the amusing things and aspects of military life that are controlled by the bizarre. After only a few weeks, I wished her well, said my goodbyes, and began the next phase of my life as a Cal Poly student. Was I on the rebound when Lily unexpectedly re-entered my life at school? Perhaps. There was also a previous bond there. I was sophisticated enough at the time to recognize that there was no point in living with remorse and memories of Maya. When I had Lily, she adored me and made it apparent that she had made a mistake all those years before. My affection for her reappeared, reinforcing the tie we had formed. Today, we were united by the memories and experiences of raising 2 children and many years of a wonderful marriage. Could I let Maya leave again? Should I? Were joyful memories and raising 2 children together enough to restore a marriage that had been ripped apart by the actions of one? Did I want to take a chance with Lily? These questions, as well as the shame I felt for not intervening to stop Lily's self-destructive behavior, not directed at me. Then one day, as we're finished up one of the final meetings at the medical center after the project was completed, Maya asked me to dinner. I was nervous. Did she understand how I felt? Did she feel the same way about me? We'd shared a tragedy and worked together for nearly 3 years on design, installation, testing, and application. We had fought bureaucracy together, and we were justified in our pride in completing this job. I arrived at her home in the Palisades, flowers in hand, unsure what to expect. Allison, her kid, gave me a smile and a once-over, as she looked so much like her mother. At 16, I had to smile. And then Maya appeared in a black outfit that nearly stopped my heart. And when I opened the car door for her, she came closer so I could smell her perfume and remarked, "I hope this evening includes dancing." As the sunshine began to fill the Gulfstream cabin, when I turned back from the window, I noticed her staring at me. Her hair was unkempt, and she looked sleepy-eyed. I leaned over to her seat and kissed her. She smiled and whispered, "I love you, Michael, and will forever." As she extended her arms to me, I led her arms to embrace me and responded, "I love you, Maya." Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened.